which involve respectively U.S. Patents 9318160B2 and 8787060B2. My name is Administrative Patent Judge Galligan, and with me are Administrative Patent Judges Jurgen and McShane. In this case, we have the petitioner, Samsung Electronics Co. Limited, and we have joined petitioners Micron Technology Inc., Micron Semiconductor Products Inc., and Micron Technology Texas LLC. Patent owner is NETLIST Inc. May we have appearances first, starting with counsel for petitioner.
Good morning. This is Theodore Chandler from Baker Botts on behalf of the petitioner, Samsung Electronics Co. Limited. With me is lead counsel Elliot Williams and backup counsel Ferenz Pazmandi. Counsel for Micron is also on the line. Micron's joined as an understudy and will not be arguing, but I believe counsel for Micron would like to introduce himself.
Yes, please do.
Thank you, Ted. For petitioner Micron, Matthew Hopkins from Winston Strawn.
For patent owner.
Good afternoon, Your Honors. For patent owner Jason Shesby on behalf of NETLIST as Pro Hoc Vice, and with me is lead counsel Dr. Zhang.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. In the hearing order, we granted each side 90 minutes of argument time for these cases. We have some housekeeping items. Our first priority is your right to be heard. So if at any time during the hearing you encounter technical or other difficulties that you feel undermine your ability to adequately represent your client, please let us know immediately, and you may do this by contacting the team who provided you with the connection information. If you stop hearing and drop off, try to note what was being discussed so we can figure out where to pick up. Please mute your microphone and only unmute when speaking. Please identify yourself when you speak so the transcript accurately reflects the speaker. When referring to an item in the record, please do so with specificity so that the panel can follow along, and for clarity in the transcript. Because we have two cases, please also note the case number. There is a public line for this, and I don't think there's any confidential information. But we had a pre-hearing conference on January 9th. Both sides had submitted objections to the other side's demonstratives at our pre-hearing conference. We advised the parties that we would reserve ruling on these objections. We will allow the parties to present on the slides. We remind the parties that, as stated in the order setting oral argument, demonstratives are not evidence. Also, yesterday, January 10th, patent owner emailed the board to request leave to submit supplemental information testimony from Micron's primary technical expert given in the parallel district court litigation. We will address this issue at the conclusion of the arguments today. Petitioner, would you like to reserve some time for rebuttal?
Yes, Your Honor. 30 minutes, please.
Okay. And we don't have a timer on the screen. I will keep time and give you a heads up when you're an hour in, but please keep time on your own as well. Let me get my clock started. And you may begin.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have some slides that I would like to share marked as Exhibit 1067. So Judge Galligan, are you able to see the slides on the screen, and can you hear me all right?
I can. Thank you.
Thank you. May it please the board. Starting with slide 5, this provides an overview of the 060 patent. As highlighted in yellow on the left in the middle, the 060 patent was filed on November 3rd, 2011. There was an earlier provisional application filed in 2010, as highlighted in red at the bottom, but our petition explained why that provisional does not provide support for the claims. Thus, our contention is that the claims are only entitled to the priority date of November 3rd, 2011, which NETLIST does not appear to dispute for purposes of these IPRs. Slide 6 shows that the 160 patent is a continuation of the 060 patent. And as shown at the bottom, again, our contention is that these claims are only entitled to a priority date of November 3rd, 2011, which again, NETLIST does not appear to dispute for purposes of these IPRs. Slide 7 provides an overview of a preferred embodiment of the 060 and 160 patents. Figure 3 on the left shows stacked array dies, numbered 310, and outlined in yellow, orange, red, purple, brown, and light purple. The vertical lines are die interconnects, numbered 320. As shown on the bottom right, the patent proposes having the die interconnects in electrical communication with only one or two of the array dies rather than all 8 of the array dies. And the patent teaches that one potential benefit of such an arrangement is that it reduces the load of a given die interconnect. For example, if the die interconnect was in electrical communication with all 8 array dies, the patent suggests that would result in a load of 10. But if the die interconnect is in electrical communication with only 1 or 2 of the array dies, then the load could be reduced to 2.5 or 3, as shown in the red boxes. Slide 8 shows on the right a preferred embodiment for the claimed term array die, which is number 210 in this figure and is highlighted in yellow and orange. Slide 9 shows on the far right a preferred embodiment for the claimed term die interconnect, which is number 220 and is highlighted in light green and teal. Slide 10 shows on the bottom right a preferred embodiment for the claimed term data conduit, which is shown as just a black dot labeled 232A and 232B. The data conduits are included in the control die, which is the green rectangle at the bottom. Slide 11 shows on the bottom right that the data conduits include a driver labeled 234 and drawn as a triangle. Slide 14 shows the instituted grounds, which are similar for both IPRs. The rows at the top, highlighted in yellow, are the grounds based on the Kim reference in combination with Rajan. These grounds cover all of the claims. The rows at the bottom, highlighted in green, are grounds based on the Reho reference in combination with Rajan, and these grounds also cover all of the claims. Slide 15 provides an overview of Kim, one of the primary references for the first set of grounds. As shown on the right, figure 5 of Kim discloses a main chip at the bottom in green, a slave chip in the middle in yellow, and another slave chip at the top in orange. You can see that they're vertical TSV1 on the left between the main chip and just the yellow chip. And then on the right, there is a TSV2 between the main chip and just the orange chip up at the top. So Kim discloses the same basic structure as the 060 and 160 patents, which is rather than have a die interconnect that's in electrical communication with all of the dies, instead you can have 2 die interconnects where each die interconnect is in electrical communication with only some of the dies. Although this figure 5 only shows 2 slave chips, as highlighted in blue on the left, Kim teaches that any number of slave chips can be used. Slide 16 provides an overview of the Rajan reference, which is included in all of the grounds. As shown by figure 4 in the middle, Rajan also teaches stacking chips, colored yellow and orange. And again, you can have 2 vertical die interconnects, shown to the right of the chips, each in electrical communication with only some of the dies. As shown on the upper left, Rajan teaches that his invention works with any type of memory, not just DRAM memory. And the reason that Rajan can use any type of memory is shown on the bottom left, which is that Rajan uses an interface circuit, shown in green, also referred to as the buffer chip in figure 4, that can use emulation logic to communicate with the host computer using the popular JEDEC standard. So even if the physical chips don't comply with JEDEC, the interface chip can emulate JEDEC. Slide 17 provides an overview of the Reho reference marked as Exhibit 1016. As explained by paragraph 103 of Reho quoted on the left, Reho teaches stacking chips and using vertical TSVs where each TSV is connected to some of the stacked chips, but not all of the stacked chips. And Reho explains that a benefit of this approach is that it reduces the electrical load, which is the same benefit proposed by the 060 and 160 patents. Slide 18 provides an overview of the Wyman reference. Wyman, like all of the other references, also discloses stacked memory chips. In the upper right, Wyman teaches that if the TSV is short, as shown by the little red rectangle, then a minimal amount of drive is required. In the middle of the slide, Wyman teaches that if the TSV is longer, as shown by the bigger red rectangle, then that requires additional drive. But at the bottom of the slide, Wyman teaches that it would be overkill to provide more drive than needed for a given TSV. So what Wyman proposes is using different numbers of transistors to achieve the optimal amount of drive for a given TSV. Slides 19 through 23 provide a summary of the grounds based on the Kim reference in combination with Rajan. Slide 21 summarizes the combination of Kim on the left with Rajan on the right. Kim on the left teaches vertical TSVs, shown in green, connected to stacked memory chips, shown in yellow and orange. And again, Kim teaches, as shown at blue in the bottom, that any number of chips may be used. Rajan on the right teaches using additional stacked memory chips, shown in yellow and in orange, for the purpose of rank multiplication. Rajan also teaches an interface at the bottom, shown in green, that complies with the JEDEC standard. By the year 2011, rank multiplication was a well-known technique in the prior art. The idea of rank multiplication was to replace one larger chip with two smaller capacity chips. Each of those smaller capacity chips could be less expensive, but together those two less expensive chips could act like one larger, more expensive chip. Slide 22 summarizes the combination of Kim and Rajan on the left with Reho on the right. Reho, like Rajan, teaches connecting two memory chips to a given TSV rather than all of the memory chips. The benefit of this approach is to reduce the electrical load on the TSV. Reho also teaches that there can be a benefit from trying to make each TSV equal in length, which is that equal-length TSVs can minimize the skew of the signals. Slide 23 summarizes the combination of Kim and Rajan on the left with Wyman on the right. Wyman, as previously discussed, teaches that longer die interconnects will require more drive, so you should tailor the size of the drive to the length of the die interconnect. Slides 24 through 56 address NETLIST's primary argument against the Kim grounds, which is that according to NETLIST, the combination lacked a reasonable expectation of success because supposedly there would be collisions on the shared data lines. NETLIST's argument depends on a narrow construction for the phrase group of array dies, which I will also discuss in this section. Slide 25 shows that NETLIST expert admits that a person of ordinary skill in the art knew that two chips could share the same data line without causing collisions, and that a posita would have been motivated to avoid data collisions. Slide 26 shows on the left that Kim expressly teaches, as shown in the quote at the bottom, that in his invention, a data collision does not occur. Rajan on the right, as shown by the quote highlighted in yellow, teaches utilizing a separate chip select signal, not shown, to each of the DRAM chips. The chip select signal was a well-known signal used to avoid data collisions. The idea is very simple, and it's the same idea that we all learned in kindergarten, which is to take turns. Instead of all the chips speaking at the same time, only one chip talks at a time, thus avoiding a collision. In particular, if you focus on the two chips highlighted in yellow in Rajan, they are a group of array dies that share the same die interconnect, highlighted in light green. But there is no collision between these two chips in yellow because the chip select signal will only select one of those two chips at a given time, thus avoiding a data collision. Slide 27 shows NETLIST theory, which is that, according to NETLIST, any combination with Kim would result in an unavoidable data collision. Slide 28 addresses the claim construction issue underlying NETLIST collision theory. NETLIST assumes that the claim language requires a group of at least 2 array dies connected to a given TSV. But the actual claim language is just first group of array dies. The actual claim language could include just 1 die connected to a given TSV, in which case there would not be a risk of collision. As shown by the quote on the right, NETLIST expert did not offer any validity opinions under a claim construction where the first group of array dies has only a single die. And figure 3 of the patent, shown in the middle, provides several examples of a group of array dies that has only 1 die connected to the TSV, such as the purple array die at the very top, the brown array die, the other purple array die, as well as the red array die. This is fatal to NETLIST's entire argument about data collisions. But even under NETLIST's overly narrow claim construction requiring at least 2 array dies in a group, there would still be no data collisions, as I will explain next. Slide 29 shows that the Kim's reference to an unavoidable data collision is limited to the unique hypothetical where 2 prior art input-output circuits are shared unbeknownst to the controller, and that as a result, the controller does not use the proper timing for the signals on those shared data lines. But as explained by our expert on the bottom right, data collisions are always avoidable, and there were many known solutions to that problem. Slide 30 shows that NETLIST collision theory is based on bodily incorporating Kim's prior art input-output circuit while ignoring the teachings of Rajan as well as the knowledge of a person of ordinary skill in the art. That's contrary to Federal Circuit case law, including the Elbrus case on the left and in re Mutet on the right. Slide 31 shows that the proposed combination does not use Kim's prior art circuit from figure 1 that can result in data collisions. Slide 32 shows that Kim teaches that in his invention, data collisions can be avoided by selectively performing operations with a predetermined time interval set there between. As explained in paragraph 31, quoted on the upper left, by using chip select signals, it is possible to prevent a data collision from occurring. Slide 33 shows that Rajan goes into great detail about how the buffer chip, shown in green, can add delays of 1 or 2 clock cycles to avoid data collisions on a shared data line. That way, if there are 2 memory commands in a row, the delay of 1 or 2 clock cycles allows the first memory command to be completed before the second memory command starts to use the shared data line. And this technique works regardless of whether the 2 commands are going to the same rank or to different ranks, because either way, all of the signals are going to pass through that buffer chip shown in green, which is what adds to the delay of 1 or 2 clock cycles. This slide concerns a read command, as shown by the 3 on the left here, which is where data is being output from the DRAM. But a similar technique also works for write commands, as shown on the next slide. Slide 34 shows another example from Rajan about the buffer adding a small amount of delay to avoid a data collision, this time in the context of a write command. Slide 35 shows that Rajan also teaches that the controller on the host computer can also add a small amount of delay to avoid a data collision. Slide 36 compares Rajan on the right to another reference called Ellsbury on the left. Rajan and Ellsbury both disclose the same layout for implementing rank multiplication. Rajan on the right says that there's a separate chip select signal, not shown, to each DRAM chip. And then Ellsbury in the middle, labeled figure 13, confirms what Rajan says, which is that each DRAM chip connected to the buffer would get a separate chip select signal, shown by these 4 arrows. The result is 4 chip select signals going to 4 chips, where only 1 chip is selected at a time, thus avoiding a data collision. Furthermore, both Rajan on the right and Ellsbury in the middle show that 2 chips can share a given die interconnect, such as the two chips in yellow or the two chips in orange. So how can two chips share a die interconnect given the risk of a data collision? Again, that's the purpose of the chip select signal. Only one chip is selected at a time, avoiding a data collision, and the buffer chip, shown in green, can add 1 or 2 clock cycles to make sure that there are no collisions in the situation where you have 2 memory commands in a row.
Counsel, this is Judge Galligan. I had a question on that. So in patent owner's response, patent owner identifies 4 scenarios or 4 possibilities that the petition could have raised with respect to Kim and Rajan about the configuration. And I wanted to ask, which of those is possibility 4, which is 4 chips belong to 4 separate ranks and two ranks share TSV, is that, let's assume that we require a group of array dies to have multiple array dies. Is that what you're proposing the combination is? Option 4?
What we refer to as their straw man argument number 4?
Well, I'm just wondering what so if Kim and Rajan are combined, is petitioner saying that you would have 4 ranks, separate ranks?
Yes.
Okay.
4 separate ranks, but 2 die interconnects, meaning that 2 ranks are connected to each die interconnect. So that's exactly what's shown here on slide 36. Okay. That's exactly what was in the petition.
This is Judge Galligan. So that's possibility 4. That's the one that's the argument that they're making against it. Possibility 4 is what you're saying your combination is, though, right? Which is 4 chips belong to 4 ranks and 2 ranks share a TSV, right?
Correct, but what I think you're calling possibility 4 is what we're calling straw man argument number 4, because, and this is, for example, on slide 50, because their straw man argument number 4 does not connect up the way that we explain, which is their straw man number 4 would only have 2 chip select signals, which is not what we propose in the petition, and not what Rajan teaches, as shown on the bottom right of slide 50. Rajan teaches a separate chip select signal to each DRAM chip.
Okay, this is Judge Galligan. I just want to make sure I understood the combo, which is 4 separate ranks.
Correct.
All right,
Correct.
Great, thanks.
So slide 37 shows the JEDEC standard, which teaches connecting 4 stacked chips in 4 separate ranks, all to the same data line, highlighted in green, and then using properly timed chip select signals, shown in the red box, to select only one of those chips at a time, thus avoiding a data collision. As shown on the right, NETLIST expert admits that the 4 stacked memory chips in the JEDEC standard would operate correctly without data collisions, even though all 4 of those chips share the same set of data lines highlighted in green and labeled DQ0 through DQ7. And the reason there's no collision is that these 4 chips are in 4 different ranks, receiving 4 different chip select signals.
Counsel, this is Judge Galligan. I had one additional question on that configuration of the combination. If you look at patent owner's response at pages 28 to 29, patent owner reproduced some declaration testimony from Dr. Wolf, your technical declarant. And in that testimony, Dr. Wolf states that it's also possible to have 4 separate ranks here. That doesn't cover all the claims, but it covers many of the claims. Which claims does that not cover?
I'm not sure what he was referring to there. I mean, I think he was just answering the question and not referring to the combination proposed, because the combination proposed in his declaration and in our petition is shown here, for example, on page 36, 4 separate ranks, 2 die interconnects. But since you're talking about that colloquy, I do want to raise a point which is a little confusing, which is that colloquy is going back and forth between the ranks from the perspective of Rajan and the ranks from the perspective of the host computer. Because remember, what Rajan's doing is rank multiplication. So when you do rank multiplication, the host computer thinks there are only 2 ranks, right? The host computer thinks there are 2 ranks, but in reality, there are 4 ranks. And so if you look at slide 81, This is part of the colloquy on this that you're referring to. What Dr. Wolf was talking about in this colloquy about 417A and 417B, and then later he was talking about 417A and 417C, he's talking about what the host computer would see. So the way that rank multiplication works is 417A and 417C are two separate ranks in the real world, but the host doesn't know that. The host only sees one larger chip that comprises 417A and 417C. So from the host perspective, 417A and 417C make up one virtual rank, and 417B and 417B make up the other virtual rank. Any follow-up on that?
Yeah, thank you.
Right. So going back to slide 37 on the JEDEC timing diagrams, actually, I'll move on to slide 38. So 38 is the timing diagram from JEDEC. JEDEC gives you a number of programmable timing parameters, such as CAS latency, which can be programmed during initialization to be anywhere from 5 clock cycles to 10 clock cycles. And the reason that JEDEC permits you to change these timing parameters is to avoid data collisions, as explained by Rajan in the slides that we talked about a few moments ago. And as shown on slide 39, which is the same slide just blown up a little bit larger, you can have, for example, on the bottom left, a write latency, abbreviated WL, of 5 clock cycles, shown in the red box on the left. And then on the right, you can have a read latency, abbreviated RL, of 5 clock cycles, as shown on the red box on the right. However, JEDEC allows you to increase the read latency independently of the write latency if you want to avoid a data collision in the situation of a write command followed by a read command. NETLIST surreply, quoted at the bottom, assumes that the read latency and the write latency must always be changed by the same amount, but that's inaccurate. JEDEC permits the read latency to be increased more than the write latency, thus providing another tool to avoid data collisions. Slide 40 is just a reminder that Rajan teaches that the buffer chip shown in green can emulate the timing from the JEDEC standard, even if the memory chips are not DRAM. Slide 41 shows that the 060 and 160 patents, they don't actually teach anything about data collisions. Instead, what they do is they just incorporate admitted prior art, such as the 537 patent. And the 537 patent quoted on the right teaches, once again, that you can avoid data collisions by adding 1 clock cycle to the CAS latency. As shown on the right, adding 1 clock cycle, quote, provides sufficient time for read and write data transfers, end quote, and those transfers are through the buffer chip. Slide 42 is another example of prior art that's incorporated in the 060 and 160 patents. This is the 436 patent, and as shown on the right, the 436 patent again teaches inserting a delay to avoid a data collision. Slide 43 is yet another example of admitted prior art incorporated by reference into the 060 and 160 patents. And again, the teaching is similar, which is that you can insert a wait time interval or clock cycles to avoid collisions. Slide 44 is a textbook, which also teaches that you can either use delays or you can use write buffers to avoid data collisions. And as shown on the bottom left, this works both for read following write to the same rank, and as shown on the bottom right, it also works for read following write to different ranks. Slide 45 shows that the 060 and 160 patents do not teach any solution to data collisions. All they do is incorporate what was already known in the admitted prior art. And this is an important point because NETLIST goes on and on about data collisions, but its own patent says nothing about data collisions. And why is that? Because by 2011, there were many known solutions to data collisions, such as the solutions that we've been discussing over the past few slides. On the bottom right is a quote from the Federal Circuit that's applicable here, which is that the challenge patent itself does not disclose a level of detail that the patent owner would have us require of the prior art. Slides 46 through 56 respond to NETLIST's collision theories for the combination of Kim and Rajan. I won't go through all of these slides in detail because they all share the same flaw, which is that they're based on what we refer to as a straw man argument, not the actual combination proposed in the petition by Dr. Wolf, but rather made-up drawings by NETLIST expert that were never actually shown to Dr. Wolf for him to comment on. And the reason is that these drawings, these straw man arguments, do not accurately reflect the combination proposed in the petition by Dr. Wolf. Slide 47 shows the first straw man argument, and I'll just use this as an example as to why these arguments aren't relevant, which is that according to NETLIST, the combination of Kim and Rajan would connect all 4 chips to the same chip select signal. That's what's shown in the upper left. And that obviously makes no sense because, as NETLIST expert admits on the bottom left, if there are multiple chips on the same data line that get the same chip select signal, then they'll all output data at the same time, causing a collision. As shown on the right at the bottom, the combination of Kim and Rajan uses separate chip select signals for each chip in the stack, thus avoiding data collisions. The figure on the bottom right is very important because NETLIST strawman arguments repeatedly ignore the layout by Rajan, where there are 4 chips, each with a separate chip select signal, and the 2 chips in yellow are in one group, sharing one die interconnect, and the other 2 chips in orange are in another group, sharing a different die interconnect. The layout taught by Rajan on the bottom right is common for rank multiplication and does not result in data collisions. All of NETLIST strawman arguments ignore this layout taught by Rajan. I'll pause there. That's all I was planning to cover on this topic of data collisions, but before I move on, are there any questions from the board? All right. Slides 57 through 65 address the claim limitation driver size and whether it's obvious to use drivers at different sizes for TSVs at different lengths. Slide 58 shows on the bottom right that the 060 and 160 patents teach that the size of the driver may be adjusted by the selection of the transistor size and or the number of transistors included in the driver. Our contention is that the prior art, especially the Wyman reference, discloses the exact same thing, and that it would be obvious to use a smaller driver size for a shorter die interconnect and a larger driver size for a longer die interconnect. Slide 59 refers to a claim construction for driver size that was adopted in the Eastern District of Texas. This case in Texas does not involve Samsung, and the claim construction shown on this slide was issued after Samsung filed its reply briefs in these IPRs. In these IPRs, neither NETLIST nor Samsung proposed the claim construction shown on this slide. And for purposes of these IPRs, the claim construction shown on this slide does not affect Samsung's invalidity arguments because this claim construction order recognizes that there's a correlation between driver strength on the one hand and transistor size or number of transistors on the other hand. Samsung's petition, as quoted by this ruling, pointed to both driver strength and transistor size as being obvious parameters that you would want to change depending on the length of the die interconnect, because those two things go hand in hand. If you want to increase the driver strength, the obvious way is to increase the number of transistors. And if you increase the number of transistors, it's obvious that you will increase the driver strength. Slide 60 shows figures 3 to 5 of Wyman on the right, and on the left reprints again the quote from the 060 and 160 patents about the size of the driver. As shown on the right, Wyman teaches that the size of the driver can be increased by increasing the number of transistors, which are represented by the triangles highlighted in blue. If you want a smaller driver, you can use only 2 blue triangles, as shown at the top in figure 3. Or if you want a larger driver, you can use 3 or 4 blue triangles, as shown in the bottom right. Slide 61 shows that figure 5 of Wyman on the right, and on the left is testimony from NETLIST expert admitting that in figure 5 of Wyman, you do not need to enable all of the drivers, highlighted in blue. which is another way that Wyman teaches changing the driver size. In this example, only 2 blue triangles are enabled, and thus both the strength of the driver as well as the physical size of the driver is smaller than if all 4 triangles had been enabled. Slide 62 shows the combination of Kim and Rajan on the left with Wyman on the right. Both Kim and Rajan on the left teach that one of the die interconnects may be longer than the other die interconnect, as shown by the red vertical rectangle. And then Wyman on the right teaches that if the die interconnect is longer, then it may require additional drive.
Council, I have a question here, and that is there a distinction? I think you're saying that the size of the driver depends on the length of the interconnect, but I think what the patent is discussing is load based on the die, the load that's imposed by the die. Can you reconcile those two things in your obviousness theories here?
Yes, Your Honor. The patent is talking about the load of the die plus the load of the interconnect, and that can be seen on slide 12, where you see it says, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's number of array dies 2, and then to the right of that, it's number of die interconnect segments. And so the patent teaches that it's assuming each array die contributes a load of 1, and each die interconnect segment contributes a load of 0.25. And then if you have to add up both the load of the die and the load of the die interconnect to get the total load that's presented to the driver. So for 332A on the far left, that'd be 2.5. 332F on the far right, that would be 3. So both Wyman as well as the patent recognize that the die interconnect, which can be, for example, a TSV, contributes to the load, and therefore the driver size should be adjusted to take into account the length of the TSV. So sticking with this example of 332A, the far left die interconnect in figure 3 of the 060 and 160 patents, that TSV in figure 3 only goes to only goes up to the 2nd floor of the 8-story building. And so it's got a shorter TSV and it has less load. Those TSVs, according to the patent, only contribute a load of 0.5, which is 2 times 0.25. Whereas on the far right, that die interconnect goes all the way up to the 8th story of the building. And so that has, according to the patent, 8 times 0.25 would be a load of 2. And then you add that to the load of the array die at the top there on the 8th floor, which is 1. So 1 plus 2 gives you a total load of 3. Any follow-up on that?
No, I think you answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Slide 64 shows that it was obvious to use a separate driver for each TSV, especially in the context of rank multiplication. The green rectangle in the middle is the chip in Ellsbury that drives the data signals. And as shown in the upper right, there's a separate driver for each data path. Those separate drivers create the fork in the road, where you can very quickly switch the data path to either the upper fork or the lower fork, which is important when you're performing rank multiplication. NETLIST argues, well, hey, you could just have one driver for all the TSVs, but neither Kim nor Rajan ever suggests using the same driver for all the TSVs. The more common approach, as shown on this slide, was to use a separate driver for each TSV. And as shown in the bottom right, the Federal Circuit has held that it's not necessary to show that a combination is the best option, only that it be a suitable option. And here it was clearly suitable to use a separate driver for each TSV. Slide 65 shows that it would be obvious to use a separate driver from Wyman for each TSV. For example, as shown on the bottom right, Wyman teaches that you could use a smaller driver like figure 3 for a shorter TSV, and you could use a larger driver like figure 4 for a longer TSV. That's what I had on this topic. Before I go to the next topic, any questions about driver size? Slides 66 through 76 concern the claim limitation array dies. and whether non-DRAM array dies were obvious. Slide 67 shows that the institution decision correctly found that the construction of the term array dies does not have any impact on these IPRs, and thus there's no need to construe the term array dies. Samsung agrees with that approach. In both the petition and the replies, Samsung argued that no construction is needed because the claims are obvious either way. If the term array dies is construed broadly to encompass DRAM, then NETLIST does not dispute that the prior art teaches DRAM. But if even if the array dies is construed narrowly to exclude DRAM, the claims are still obvious because the Rajan reference teaches that any type of memory whatsoever may be used, as quoted by the board on the right side of this slide. Slide 71 shows that Kim's slave chips are not limited to DRAM dies, as the board correctly recognized in the upper left. Slide 72 again shows that Rajan is not limited to DRAM dies, as the board correctly recognized in the upper left. To the contrary, Rajan expressly states in the bottom left that any type of memory whatsoever can be used with Rajan's invention. Slide 73 shows that the reason that Rajan can use any type of memory whatsoever is because of that interface circuit shown in green, which can emulate the JEDEC standards, even if the memory chips highlighted in yellow and orange are not DRAM. Slide 74 shows that it was well known, not just in Rajan, but in other references as well, by 2011, that you could use non-DRAM dies, such as flash memory or SRAM memory, along with a DRAM interface. This slide is referring to the best reference, which again, like Rajan, teaches using a DRAM interface, even though the actual memory devices may be flash memory, as shown on the far right, or they could be SRAM memory, as quoted on the bottom left. Before I go on to the next topic, any questions about this section on array dies? Okay, slides 77 through 86 concern the claim limitation chip select signals. Slide 78 shows that the district court said the term chip select signal should be given its plain and ordinary meaning. As shown in the middle of the slide, the JEDEC standard teaches that the chip select signal is how you select the chips that will perform a given command, and that those chips are performing the command are referred to as a rank. So there's a relationship between the chip select signal and the rank. Slide 79, again, we've seen before, the JEDEC standard teaches using separate chip select signals shown in red, going to each of the 4 stacked dies, sharing the data bus shown in green. Only one chip connected to the shared data line is selected at a time by the chip select signal, thus avoiding collisions. Slide 80 shows that both Kim on the left and Rajan on the right expressly teach using chip select signals. Slide 81 shows that Rajan, as quoted in the upper left, teaches performing rank multiplication with a separate chip select signal going to each die in the stack. And as explained by our expert on the right, you would not want to connect 2 dies sharing a data line to the same chip select signal, because that could result in a collision. Slide 82 again compared Rajan on the right to Ellsbury on the left to show that it was common to use separate chip select signals when you have multiple chips sharing the same die interconnect, as was common for rank multiplication. And slides 83 and 84 show that the institution decision correctly found that the petitions demonstrated an invalidity under the district court's plain and ordinary meaning claim construction for chip select signals. And slide 85 shows that even non-DRAM devices use chip select signals, including SRAM memory devices as shown in the middle, and flash memory devices as shown on the bottom right. Before I go on to the next topic, any questions about chip select signals? In the interest of time, I was thinking of skipping ahead. Slides 87 through 93 concern Claim 7 of the 060 patent. Does the board have any questions about Claim 7 of the 060 patent? Right, in the interest of time, then
Is
I'll
this,
stop.
this is Judge Galligan, just remind me, is this the first terminal one, the issue?
No.
First terminal?
No.
Oh, okay,
No.
thank you. I forgot which
okay.
claim that is. I think it's in the 060.
No.
That's claim 1. Okay, never mind. Thanks.
All right. Slides 94 through 151 concern the second set of grounds based on the Reho references in combination with Rajan. Slide 95 shows that some of these grounds involve the Reho 2 reference, marked as Exhibit 1018, which has the same inventor as the Reho reference, marked as Exhibit 1016. And as shown on the top of this slide, the Reho 2 reference also concerns stacking chips. And as shown at the bottom of the slide, the Reho 2 reference teaches optimizing the output drive according to changes in capacitance and resistance. Slide 97 summarizes the combination of Reho and Rajan. Reho on the left teaches using a control die at the bottom, highlighted in green, that is connected via TSVs, the groups of stacked array dies, such as the group of 2 array dies highlighted in yellow at the bottom, or the group of 2 array dies highlighted in orange at the top. Rajan on the right teaches the control die, highlighted in green, can provide an interface that complies with the JEDEC standard, which is useful for several reasons, including the ability to implement ranked multiplication. And to your point, Judge Galligan, I think this may be what you're getting at with the data conduits connected to the same data terminal. And so in the combination with Reho and Rajan, that is how it works, so that you have a fork in the road where Rajan has 2 die interconnects going to 2 data conduits that get connected via a fork in the road to the same data terminal. And the purpose for that is rank multiplication.
This is Judge Galligan.
Slide.
I had a question. This is Judge Galligan. I had a question on that slide, actually, is 97. So my understanding of the Reho and Rajan grounds that you're relying on, the structure of Reho, the TSV is going up. You have these, there's a dispute about whether there's electrical communication, but you're relying on the structure of the Reho stacked dies with the TSVs, right?
Correct. It's one way to think of it. It's really Rajan, except what Reho teaches is that there can be a benefit to extending the die interconnect all the way to the top, even if the die interconnect at the top isn't connected to any dies. So if you focus on Rajan on the right, the way Rajan is drawn is the 2 die interconnects are different lengths. So the light green one is shorter, the teal one is taller. The teaching of Reho is that there can be some benefit to extending the shorter die interconnect up the stack, which is that you can balance the load and therefore reduce the skew between the signals.
Okay, this is Judge Galligan, because on Petitioner's reply page 30 in the 1427 case, it says that I'm looking at the page 30, it has a picture of the annotated figure 4 from Rajan, and you can probably bring it up in a minute here, but
this one here?
there, yeah, and it says, you have a statement there, it says NETLIST argues that it's, unquote, unclear what modified structure Petitioner proposes, unquote, but it is shown directly above. And my understanding of the structure is that you're relying on Rehos, TSVs, and the stacked SDRAMs. So what's the structure you're referring to here?
I think, well, for this argument, the question is the not an electrical communication. And both Reho and Rajan teach that if that each die interconnect is only connected to 2 of the dies. And you can see that very clearly in Rajan, which is the light green die interconnect does not connect to any of the orange dies. And conversely, the teal die interconnect does not connect to any of the yellow dies. So for not an electrical communication, it's very clear that Rajan satisfies that. Reho also satisfies that, for given the transmission gates that that cut off any connection. But, Rajan shows that even more clearly.
Okay, this is Judge Goggins. So I just want to clarify that you were referring, when you say the modified structure is shown above, you're talking about in relation to the electrical communication argument?
Well, on page 30, that's what we're getting at. But page 30 also gets to your question about the two data conduits, whether they connect to the same data terminal. And that's the pink data conduit and the rose data conduit as shown on page 30 of our reply. Both go to the same data terminal. And it's also shown on slide 97 of our slides. All right, should I move forward? Okay, slide 98 summarizes the combination of Reho and Rajan with Reho 2. Reho on the left teaches that TSV may have varying amounts of impedance due to manufacturing variations and also due to the position of the chip connected to the TSV. Reho 2 on the right side teaches that you should optimize the driver to account for such variations. Slides 99 through 119 concern the claim limitation electrical communication and what it means to be not in electrical communication with some of the array dies. Slide 100 shows that every claim requires the first die interconnect, which in this example is light green, to be in electrical communication with the first group of array dies, which we've highlighted in yellow, and not in electrical communication with the second group of at least one array die, which in this example we've highlighted in orange. Slide 101 shows the combination of Reho and Rajan satisfies the claim limitation of the die interconnect not in electrical communication with some of the array dies. And again, Rajan on the far right teaches very clearly that the light green die interconnect only connects to the two array dies highlighted in yellow and does not have any electrical communication with the two array dies at the top highlighted in orange. The claim requirement is also satisfied by Reho on the left, as I will discuss in the next few slides. Slide 102 shows that the institution decision on the left correctly found that paragraph 65 of Reho on the right teaches that the TSV is not an electrical communication with some of the array dies. In figure 5 of Reho on the bottom right, you can see that there are green boxes with the word on to show that the TSV on the left is connected to the two dies at the top labeled D15 and D7. In contrast, the TSV on the left is not connected to the two array dies at the bottom labeled D14 and D6. The blue boxes labeled off are transmission gates, which are shown in more detail in figure 6C on the bottom right. And those transmission gates disconnect the TSV from the array dies labeled D14 and D6, thus preventing any electrical communication. Slide 104 shows the claim construction that was adopted by the district court after Samsung filed its reply brief in these IPRs. The district court's claim construction rejected NETLIST's primary argument in these IPRs. The district court held that the mere existence of data ports without more does not satisfy the electrical communication requirement of the claims. This claim construction confirms that Reho satisfies the requirement of a die interconnect that's not in electrical communication with some of the array dies, as I will explain in the next slide. So slide 109. Slide 109 shows that Reho on the right has these transmission gates highlighted in blue that are permanently turned off using ROMs that are highlighted in red, both in figure 5 and in figure 6C. Those permanently turned off transmission gates means that there's no electrical connection and thus no electrical communication between the TSV on the left and the array dies labeled D14 and D16. Slide 110 shows that the transmission gate in Reho that's turned off, as shown by the blue highlighting, is similar to what the 060 and 160 patents describe as an insulator to prevent electrical communication with the array die circuitry. The right side of this slide is a page from a textbook, which shows a transmission gate at the top, and you can see that the textbook is drawing the same circuitry. It's flipped upside down, but the same circuitry as figure 6C of Reho. And the textbook shows in the red rectangle that a transmission gate is equivalent. The equivalent circuit is basically just a break in the wire. That's what a transmission gate does, is it functionally breaks the wire so that there's no electrical communication, no electrical connection at all. Slide 111 shows the figure drawn by a NETLIST expert in the upper left is totally wrong, and thus his opinions are unreliable. The figure drawn by a NETLIST expert in the upper left shows a signal going from the left side of the transmission gate all the way over to the right side of the transmission gate. And that's totally wrong, as NETLIST expert admitted on the bottom left. As shown again by the textbook on the right, when the transmission gate is off, as shown in this red rectangle, there's no electrical connection from the left side to the right side, and thus there's no electrical communication from the left side to the right side. Slide 112 shows that NETLIST expert admitted that when the transmission gate in Reho is off, as highlighted in blue, that means the TSV on the left is not electrically connected to the L1C2R2 driver circuit on the right, which is part of the data port on the array die. And if there's no electrical connection, that means there cannot be any electrical communication. Slide 113 shows that when the transmission gate in Reho is off, not only does that mean that there's no electrical connection, it also means that there's no electrical load from the SDRAMs that can be seen by the TSV. So under any possible claim construction, Reho's TSV is not in electrical communication with the array dies when the transmission gate is turned off, because there's no electrical connection with those array dies and there's no electrical load from those array dies. Slide 114 shows our expert on the left explaining that when Reho's switch is off, any remaining load is negligible. Slide 115 shows that the testimony of NETLIST expert on the left is directly contrary to Reho's express disclosure on the right. NETLIST expert on the left assumes that Reho's transmission gate will materially increase the load on the TSV, whereas Reho on the right says the exact opposite. Reho on the right says that in the situation if you have two SDRAMs connected to TSV, if you were to turn off the transmission gate to one of those two SDRAMs, that would reduce by half the load on the TSV. According to NETLIST on the left, the load wouldn't change even if you turn off the transmission gate, because according to NETLIST, the transmission gate presents a significant load. But Reho on the right teaches that the transmission gate does not present a load and instead disconnects the load from a given SDRAM, which is why the load can be reduced by half if you turn off the transmission gate to one of two SDRAMs. Slide 116 shows that NETLIST expert opinion must be disregarded, according to precedent both from the Federal Circuit and the board, because his opinion is plainly inconsistent with the teachings of Reho. Slide 117 shows that NETLIST expert opinion on the left is also contrary to the district court's claim construction for electrical communication on the right. NETLIST expert opines that if there's a data port, then there's electrical communication. But the district court's claim construction on the right says that the mere existence of data port does not satisfy the electrical communication requirement. And as shown at the bottom left, when Reho's transmission gates are turned off, as highlighted in blue, they completely disconnect the TSV on the left from any data ports on the right, meaning that there cannot be electrical communication. All right, before I go on to the next topic, any questions from the board about electrical communication? All right, slides 120 through 126 concern the claim limitations requiring a first and second data conduit. And this is related to the question you asked Judge Galligan about the two data conduits going to the same data terminal. So slide 121 shows that the claim refers to a first data conduit and a second data conduit, shown as these black dots, 232A and 232B. And then the claim goes on to require that the first data conduit and the second data conduit are both connected to the same data terminal at the bottom, and that's sometimes referred to as a fork in the road layout. Slide 122 shows that the combination of Reho and Rajan teaches a fork in the road layout where the first and second data conduits, shown in the bottom right in pink and rose, both connect to the same data terminal at the bottom of the control die. And as explained by our expert on the left, a fork in the road layout was common for implementing rank multiplication. Slide 123 again shows Ellsbury on the left as another example of a fork in the road layout for implementing rank multiplication, similar to Rajan on the right. In both Ellsbury and Rajan, the buffer chip highlighted in green can route the data to or from one of the two die interconnects, thus creating a fork in the road for the data signal. Slide 124 shows that when you perform rank multiplication, you still have a separate chip select signal for each array die in the stack, meaning that only one array die is selected at a time for a read or write operation. Otherwise, there'd be a collision. And given that only one array die is selected at a time for a read or write operation, only one of the two die interconnects needs to be connected to the data terminal at a time, which results in the fork in the road layout for the data signals. Slide 125 shows that NETLIST's surreply argument relies on another straw man argument that ignores the actual teaching of Rajan. As shown in the upper left, NETLIST argues that Rajan only has two ranks. That's incorrect. As shown in the upper right, Rajan has four chip select signals, one for each array die, meaning that there are four ranks. On the right in the middle is the JEDEC standard, which teaches that a chip select signal is how you select a rank. And remember, though, as I discussed earlier, Rajan's performing rank multiplication, which means that the host computer thinks that there are two ranks of higher density memory chips, when in reality, Rajan actually has four ranks of lower density memory chips. So for example, the two ranks labeled 417A and 417C in Rajan can appear to the host computer as one rank of higher density memory, while the other two ranks labeled 417B and 417D in Rajan can appear to the host computer as another rank of high density memory. That's how rank multiplication works. But the important point is that inside of Rajan, there are actually four ranks, each with a separate chip select signal. Slide 126 shows that NETLIST surreply raises another straw man argument that ignores what Rajan teaches. NETLIST argues on the upper right that Reho does not teach a fork in the road layout, and thus according to NETLIST, the first and second data conduits do not both connect to the same data terminal. But that ignores the teachings of Rajan on the left, which is part of the combination with Reho. Rajan teaches a fork in the road layout for rank multiplication, and the petition explained why a person of ordinary skill would have been motivated to implement such a fork in the road layout in the combination with Reho. Before I go on to the next topic. Yeah.
It's Judge Galligan. I just want to give you a heads up. You're 1 hour in.
All right. I've actually only got a few more slides. Let's go real quick. So slides.
I just want to.
Yeah. Slides 127 through 132 concern the array die issue, and it's basically the same issue we discussed before. As shown on slide 128, the institution decision correctly found that the construction of array die has no impact on the Reho grounds, because as shown in the upper right, Reho explains that its disclosure is not limited to DRAM. Slide 129 shows that both Reho on the left and Rajan on the right disclose non-DRAM array dies, thus rendering the claims obvious, regardless whether array dies is construed to exclude DRAM dies. Slides 133 to 138 concern the claim limitation chip select signals. With respect to the Reho grounds, again, this is similar issues as what I described for the Kim ground in slides 77 through 86. If you look at slide 136, this shows Reho on the bottom expressly discloses chip select signals labeled CS1 and CS0. Furthermore, in the combination with Rajan on the right, it would be obvious to use a separate chip select signal for each of the 4 DRAM chips in the stack when implementing rank multiplication. And slides 137 and 138 show that the institution decision correctly found that in the combination of Reho and Rajan, it would be obvious to have chip select signals. Slides 139 through 142 address the claim limitation, the second driver size being different from the first driver size for the Reho grounds. In this ground, as shown on slide 140, instead of using Wyman, the combination is with Reho 2. There's some similarities between Reho 2 and Wyman, but for this combination, we're using Reho 2. And as shown on the right, Reho 2 teaches that you should optimize the size of the driver to account for variations to capacitance and resistance. And Reho on the left teaches that manufacturing variations, as well as the position of the chip on the TSV, can impact capacitance and resistance. Slide 141 in the upper right shows that Reho 2 teaches optimizing the driver size due to any variation in capacitance and resistance. And the reason you want to do that is because capacitance and resistance can affect the time constant. And so you want your signals to be running at the proper speed. And if there's a variation in capacitance or resistance, that can affect the speed of the signals. And so Reho 2 teaches changing the driver size to make sure that the speed is what you want. Slide 142 is the last slide I'll talk about for now. Shows that it was well known to optimize drivers according to the difference in the location of the driver in the, according to the location of the die in the stack. So if the die is further away, you may need to adjust the driver strength. That provides further motivation for combining Reho 2 with Reho. All right, I will rest there for now.
This is Judge Galligan, thank you. You've used up about 1 hour and 4 minutes. Let me make a note of that. So you'll have 26 minutes for a rebuttal if you choose. Patent owner, if petitioner has a rebuttal, you may have a surrebuttal. Would you like to reserve any time for that?
Yes, Your Honor, I'd like to reserve 15 minutes if I could.
15 minutes. Okay, great. Keep time. I will give you a heads up at about 1 hour and 15 minutes to let you know you're into your rebuttal time.
Thank you.
And are you ready?
I am, Your Honors.
You may be in.
It may please the Honorable Board. There's this fundamental aspect of due process that is set out in the CFRs at Section 42. The basic concept is that in the petition and the declaration, the grounds are set out so it's not a nose of wax where every single time their expert admits the combination would fail in deposition, they just change the grounds. I heard so many times I was not able to count that chip select signals solve all collision problems. You can look through the petition and the declaration that was filed in these matters, and there is no such statement. There's a reason there's no such statement. It's because it doesn't, and Kim definitively states it doesn't. I heard so many times I couldn't count, oh, our combination is a chip select for each die. So in Reho, that would be 16 chip selects. And in Kim plus Rajan, that would be a chip select for each separate chip. That is nowhere in their petition. Their petition is utterly silent as to how the combination of Reho and Rajan and Kim and Rajan when it actually worked, because it doesn't work. The concept of a fork in the road is the magical elixir that makes clear that Rajan has a shared data interconnect, data terminal, and that the prior art references would share that data terminal. That is nowhere in the petition or the declaration. My honorable opponent will have an hour and 15 minutes to find those statements in the petition. He will not find them. If there is no advancement over the prior art, you should invalidate these patents. If this patent contributes something meaningful and important to the art, you should protect them. Dr. Lee was the Chief Technology Officer of NETLIST for many, many years. Dr. Lee designed dozens of commercial packages that NETLIST manufactured and sold. And I think it's important to understand what is the insight behind this patent, because it percolates into the claims. So the idea of stacked chips with TSVs running through them was in the art. But Dr. Lee noticed something problematic about that. And what he noticed is that by having the TSV in electrical communication, which each of the dies, it creates a significant load, which creates a significant power demand on the chips. This is slide 15. And Your Honors, can you see my slides okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you. It's in the, just so you know, it's in the, it's not in the presentation mode, which is fine, but if you have any notes, yeah, there you go.
There we go. What Dr. Lee hit upon was an idea of physically isolating, physically breaking any link between a given die and a TSV. He talks about insulating it. He talks about a via, a hole, but the idea behind it is to make sure no load will exist on that die array. Judge Durgan spoke about this as one of the observations. There was a suggestion that what Dr. Lee disclosed, which was reducing electrical load, was no different than what Reho was concerned with. Reho and Dr. Lee's patents are actually very different in a very meaningful way. Reho believes it can decrease load by turning off data ports. Dr. Lee deploys two set of techniques. Those two techniques involve not just the pass-through, not just turning off a data port, but using pass-throughs to dramatically decrease the load, what he describes as non-electrical communication, but also carefully calculating the number of TSVs, the lengths that are used to each of the groups of dies. And the combination of those two to get below critical thresholds in loads. I can show this at column 13 and 14 of the patent. What Dr. Lee does is he goes through detailed calculations to quantitatively design in advance the particular load. Not just make them equal, which is what Reho wants, not just remain silent on load, which is what Kim does, but to design them below a particularized threshold. And by designing them below that particularized threshold, by quantitatively knowing in advance what your loads are going to be, you can then specifically create customized drivers. And you can make those customized drivers because it's determinate, because you've calculated the exact load you're going to need. Reho doesn't do that. Kim doesn't do that. Reho could care less about the load caused by the TSV, and Kim could care less about loads at all. The end result of this is in column 8. This Lockwood argument, an argument just like essentially every argument that was made by Samsung in this oral argument, was an argument in reply. And the reason why it was put in reply is so their expert could have been tested on it. Because if he would have been tested upon it, he would have told the truth, which is that there's a basic physics behind the speed at which a given memory die can clear a load or clear a read. And we'll talk about it at Kim, and we'll talk about that in Reho. And it's inescapable. The way...
Well, this is
Yes.
I'm sorry, this is Judge Galligan. The Lockwood argument, my understanding is, I think Petitioner cited that with respect to the collisions issue, right?
That is correct, Your Honor. And collisions was an issue.
Right. So you raised an issue in your patent response that there would be this, whenever you have two dies sharing an interconnect, which, interconnect bus, whatever, there would be unavoidable collisions. How does the patent solve that problem?
It solves it at column 8, lines 1 through 21, which is what I was just getting to,
Okay,
Judge.
thanks. Thank you.
Which say that you cannot control the speed at which a read or write will come from the host system. You also cannot control the speed at which a given chip will be able to handle the read and write and how many cycles it will take to get through them. What you can control, though, and what the patent speaks about controlling, is you make the speed, and it discusses this right at the bottom. It discusses reducing latency in the accessing of the array dies and the operating, which increases the speed and operating at higher clock frequencies. So what the patent teaches is the solution to collisions is not some creative or made up timing that counsel talked about in reply and in his oral argument. The solutions to collisions and the way collisions are actually implemented in HBMs today, or avoided in HBMs today, is by you dramatically remove the latency on the TSVs that dramatically increases the speed at which the load and reads can be cleared. And that is what that's what avoids the collisions. It's a physical solution to a timing problem, not a timing solution to a physical problem.
Counsel, let me ask you about, this is Judge Galligan, let me ask you about that because I don't see anything in column 8 about collisions. I was looking at column 21 of the 160 patent at around line 36, and it says that you avoid collisions by controlling the timing, and it says you do this in line 34. You do this with a data path control circuit that's not shown, but it can somehow control these time slots so you don't have collisions. So I'm confused as to why, even if you speed things up, why if you share a data path, there wouldn't be inherent collisions, given your arguments that none of the prior art combinations would work because of these collisions.
Well, to be clear, the collision issue is a Kim specific issue. But the answer is, in Kim, it takes 1 cycle to clear on a load. It takes 3 cycles to clear on a read. And that's because the speed at which the data goes up and down the lines. If you can dramatically speed up the clock speed and dramatically decrease the latency, you can make it so that the reads and writes don't have that ineluctable collision where read just takes longer than a write does to clear.
Counsel, this is Judge Galligan. Did you submit declaration testimony on why this column 8 disclosure of the inherent property of this package would avoid collisions?
So we couldn't have, because the argument was raised in reply, Your Honor. But having said that, Dr. Brogioli does talk about in his declaration the fact that the design that you've seen here, which is not a multi-drop design but a point-to-point design, and I can get you that passage. He cites to the S.K. Hynix article that talks about the failings of the multi-port design, multi-drop design, and how SK Hynix and Samsung have both adopted the design in this patent to achieve commercial products that could handle these chips, stacked chips, with large numbers of dies. And give me one moment and I'll find that for you, Your Honor. You know, Your Honor, with your permission, I'll get you the site, I'll get you the pin site of that at the
That's
next
fine.
break.
Let me ask you another, this is Judge Galligan, let me ask you another question. So just to be clear, this column 8, line 1 to 21 disclosure you're pointing to in the 160 patent, you're saying that what it says here is that, if you decrease the load, you're gonna, it's better. But if the prior art teaches decreasing the load better, doesn't that solve the collision issue? If that's the inherent solution to the collision issue.
Yes, so the prior art that describes decreasing the load is the Reho reference. The Reho reference and the combination between Reho and Rajan fails not because of a collision, it fails because it doesn't share a data terminal. But having said that, Reho is, the challenge with Reho is Reho believes it's decreasing load by turning off data ports. Reho never says that decreasing the load by turning off data ports coupled with designing a load threshold based on the length of the TSVs is the solution. Reho is missing that second part, which is taking into account the load caused by the TSVs. The third problem is that Reho fails to take into account that though it is decreasing the load by turning off the data ports, it still has quite significant load even with those data ports turned off.
And counsel, this is Judge Galligan. I wanted to ask you a quick question because you were talking about the industry and things. Pages 1 to 2 of your patent response, you talk about the history of the commercial 3DS and HBM, and you say it's objective evidence that the patent design is not obvious. Petitioner doesn't explain why something didn't happen. Are you making a secondary considerations, objective evidence argument in your papers?
So we can't, because the information to show that SK Hynix and Samsung infringed the patents is all under seal. What we can do is we can cite to the SK Hynix argument, which is Exhibit 2023, page 18.
Let me just clear, you didn't make that argument. You didn't show nexus. You didn't do any of that, right? I just want to, for the record, I just want to make this clear.
Yeah, that's correct, Your Honor. It's impossible.
All right, thank you.
Counsel, can I ask one question here? And that is, I appreciate that you're saying that the patents disclose limiting load below a certain threshold or balancing the loads, and that this avoids data collisions. But where is this in the claims?
Yeah, so I'm about to get to that, Your Honor.
Thank you.
So, this is slide 2 in your deck, speaks about the toolkit that allows you to achieve a design that can create the following elements. So the claims talk about a first die interconnect and a second die interconnect that share a data terminal. But those die interconnects can have differing amounts of dies. One can have at least 2 dies on it, one must have at least 2 dies on it, and one only needs to have 1. And the combination of being able to flexibly add multiple dies to one interconnect while having 1 die on another interconnect allows you to target this threshold level. That's the first point. Reho and Rajan don't deal with that because in Reho and Rajan, what you have is they do not disclose any shared data terminal for internal TSVs, and that's because they know there would be a conflict. Reho's entire goal is to have 256 data terminals with no sharing, and Petitioner admits that Rajan does not disclose internal TSVs at all. So the first aspect of it is 2 groups, one with multiple dies, one with only requiring a single die, which allows you to dial in the amount of load that you need to get below a critical threshold. The second aspect of it is the following, which is the use of customized drivers that drive with the exact amount of power you need to respond to each load. And the third aspect of it, and this is an issue that we're just going to have to accept an inconsistency. Reho talks about the idea of shutting off a data port, and when that data port is off, there being no electrical connection. And Your Honor said, well, no electrical connection must mean no electrical communication. But the reality is that both petitioners' experts and patent owners' experts agree that the design in Reho does in fact constitute electrical communication. It carries a load. The purpose of science and engineering is advancement. Reho believed all you needed to do was turn off the switch. Dr. Lee concluded that was incorrect. And so it's the combination of the physical separation, the customized driver sizes, and the fact that you have a tool that allows you to have multiple dies in one group, a single die in another group, and still connect them to a same data terminal without collision that reflects the toolkit that Dr. Lee developed.
Counsel, this is Judge Galligan. I had a question on the terminal issue. You mentioned they're internal. What are you referring to there? Internal terminals? Which claim limitation are we talking about?
Yes, Your Honor. So the combination, the claims require a shared data terminal between the first die interconnect and the second die interconnect. And
sorry, there's 2 different patents, and one says first terminal, one says data terminal. Which one are you referring to?
I believe they both say data terminal, Your Honor, but right on the slide right now, I'm focusing on the 160 claim, 060 claim language.
Right, and so in the 060, I'm looking at that. Okay, so go ahead. Where are these? It says the plurality, the memory package has a plurality of input-output terminals. You said something like they're internal to the dice or something like that? Or
no, Your Honor. The TSVs that Petitioner relies on in their for Reho and Rajan are internal TSVs. I'm sorry, for Reho and Park are internal TSVs in a stack. Rajan doesn't involve internal TSVs. And my point is that there's no disclosure anywhere in the art of using internal TSVs and having those internal TSVs share a single data terminal. That was the point I was trying to make. Not that the data terminal needs to be internal, that would be an impossibility.
And just so yeah, okay. Where, I was looking at the patent, and the 160 is what I picked as sort of representative. It's got the same spec. The thing I found about terminals in there is it just says not shown. I think.
That you
So I
said
was
that.
just trying to figure out. Yeah, it says, you know, memory package in column 5, line 11, 10 to 11, memory package 200 may include input output terminals not shown. So you're building a lot into this idea of that the first terminal means all this, when I guess you're assuming first that it's singular, and there's several certain cases that say a singular can also include a plural, but it says it's not shown, and you're indicating that the whole crux of this invention is that there's something about it sharing a terminal, and I'm wondering where that's in the patent as well.
Yes.
I mean, obviously data goes out of a memory package because that's the point of the memory.
Yeah,
so there are input-output terminals.
I don't think there's any argument in the petition that shared terminal means that that it can be multiple terminals that are not connected together. That would be an entirely new argument that has never been briefed in the first instance, Your Honor. In the second instance, I believe that the section that discusses yes, Your Honor. It's at column 6, lines 64, all the way to column 7, column 8, lines 20, discusses the idea of sharing a data terminal.
I'm sorry, counsel. Can you, I apologize. Can you repeat that site? I just missed it. I was looking at something else. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor. It is column 6, lines 62, running over to column 8, lines 20. And petition.
Is this the 160 patent? This is Judge Gallagher.
Yes, I'm citing to the 160 patent. And the petitioner as well cites that same passage. In particular, their pin site is 651 through 54.
Your Honors, this is Anita Zong on behalf of patent owner. It may be easier if you look at figures 2 and 3, where you will see there is a DQ signal there, and the DQ is a data terminal. And the DQ is at the bottom of the control die. There is this pin called DQ. That's a data terminal. And it's connected to both die interconnect 220A and 220B. So that's an example of where the two die interconnects are through the two drivers, 234 and 232A and 232B, connected to the same data terminal DQ. The same, I believe, in figure 3. If you look at, so figure 3 is not as clear, but it also shows that it's connected through a big triangle to the same data terminal. But figure 2 definitely shows that the two die interconnects, 222A and 222B, are connected to the same DQ data terminal.
And that's discussed in the 6 through 8 passage.
Yeah.
Judge Gallagher, thank you. This is Judge Gallagher. So I see they're connected, so they randomly draw data to the same point and there's no collision. Is there a multiplexer involved? I mean, I see that there's a common point. Is there a solution to that issue in the patent?
Yes, Your Honor. It's by dramatically decreasing the latency and increasing the speed. That die down there is a buffer die, and the collision occurs on the shared TSV. The collision doesn't occur at the bottom. At the bottom, there's a buffer die and a control die that can handle the signals as they come in. The issue is the collision that occurs between the dies in the stack. And that's what the increasing the speed and decreasing the latency solves.
Okay, thank you.
But once again, this argument could have been joined if it was an argument that was made in the petition itself. Okay, so let's go to the first set of grounds. And I'm going to go in the inverted order.
Counsel, this is Judge Galligan. I had a question on that because it seems like, so in for instance, the 060 patent, your argument is that there's no single terminal at which two die interconnects meet. Well, the die interconnects in the 060 patent in Claim 1 are defined as being in communication with two different groups of array dies, which, if we look at that figure we were just talking about, there would be a collision because wouldn't you have, for instance, in Figure 2, you'd have interconnect 220A and interconnect 220B meeting at the same terminal. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. It seems like there would just be terminals, or there's a way to terminate these lines and get the data out, but you seem to be putting a lot of emphasis on the fact that there's a single terminal and that it would magically work because of timing, or not because of timing, because it's just inherently faster.
Well, I think what you have is that you have it's the petitioner who is saying that it would magically work just because of timing. That's their theory in their reply brief and oral argument. And you have our position that the petition, that the speed and decreased latency below a threshold is what allows you to physically change the operation of the dies and and that will avoid the collision, coupled with the control die at the bottom, which is what the petition speaks about, what the patent speaks about.
Your Honors, this is Anita again. And one of the things, Your Honors, assuming that the data is being output at the same time via 220A and 220B, and that is not necessarily the case. And it's reflected in the claim language, the last limitation, where there is a control circuit that is basically controlling the data conduit status in response to the control signals received from the second set of terminals, which means it could be the case that it's going to control which of the data is going to be outputted to the DQ terminals to avoid the collision that way.
I guess the short answer is that the patent talks about using a control die coupled with keeping the latency below a threshold, or the load below a threshold, to dramatically decrease latency and increasing speed allows you to create a structure that allows you to share a data terminal, allows you to sort of achieve the design in which two interconnects, one with multiple dies, one with a single die, can coexist together. The first limitation is that the idea of no two of Reho's TSVs share a data terminal. And that is a limitation in the claim. And I think it says a first and the first being a data terminal. All of them are singular. That's the design in the patent embodies that. And I don't think there's been any dispute in the petition that it has to be a single data terminal as opposed to multiple data terminals that are separate. This is the design of Reho. Reho is a design in which there is a separate, Reho design in which there are 16 chips. Those 16 chips each output 32 bits. Those 32 bits are output on 256 TSVs, and there's no discussion whatsoever of those TSVs ever sharing a data terminal at any point in time. In fact, if the chips shared a data terminal, there would be, it would go against the entire purpose of Reho. And what I mean by that, so if you look at columns 33 and paragraph 33 and paragraph 40 of Reho. Reho speaks about an 8-bake structure with 32-bit signals in parallel in column 33, and then in column 44, it talks about 256-bit width in total. The whole idea behind Reho is that there's not a shared data terminal, but instead that there is a separate pin for each 256 TSVs. By having a separate pin for each 256 TSVs, you can push out as much power, you can get as high bandwidth as you possibly can. The combination that Petitioner uses with Reho is Rajan, and they draw that little pink and purple caret at the bottom of Rajan to talk about fork in the road or single connecting data terminal. That is nowhere in Rajan. In fact, Rajan, which they admit is JEDEC compliant, JEDEC compliance, if we look at Jacobs, which is their evidence, not ours, and we discussed this at POR 78 through 79 in the 1428 action, is one data terminal for each data wire. That is JEDEC. So this idea of having and combining together multiple data wires for JEDEC is that Rajan would be teaching applying multiple data wires is combining multiple data wires into a single data terminal is absolutely contradictory to JEDEC and appears nowhere in the patent, in Rajan or in the art. It also wouldn't make sense to ever use chip select signals in the way that Petitioner proposes now. And the reason for that, and this may explain to you why Petitioner has changed its position, is that Reho has two groups, D0 through D7, and then D8 through D15. And those two groups each represent a rank in the sense that they together will put out an entire data word. And so if you use the chip select as Dr. Wolf would propose between the top and the bottom, which is what they describe as their rank 1 and rank 0, if you use a chip select, what you would have is you would break the system because the chip select would be sending data from D15, but it would be shutting off data from D8, which is necessary for you to get the complete data word, the complete word out at the same time. Likewise, if you did a chip select signal and you turned off every single die, which is, I guess, their new proposal, and you leave one die on, that would once again render Reho inoperable because Reho wants all those 8 dies to in parallel be producing their data in order to give the complete data word. And this is our slide 26, which points this out. And then if you go to slide 101 in our presentation, Dr. Wolf explains exactly why you need to have the, you can't have a situation in which you use chip selects to turn off some, but not other, of the dies in a given rank. And the reason for that is that these TSVs can only carry 1 bit at once. And because they can only carry 1 bit at once, you can't have a situation in which you shut off some of the dies. For example, you can't turn off rank 8. You can't turn off rank 8 and keep rank 15 on, because then you wouldn't be able to have the full data word. So it's not a collision per se, Your Honor, for Reho plus Rajan. The problem is that it's the entire destruction of the purpose of Reho, which is to have all the data being pulled down in parallel. idea, and if we go to slide,
Let me ask you this, Mr. Shesby. This is Judge Callaghan. Petitioners, for instance, the 1428 case, the petitioner points to the DQ and Kim as the terminal. And that's what you point to in the patent, or your co-counsel point to in the patent, in the 060 patent as the terminal. So why aren't they the same? Why isn't a single DQ point a first terminal?
oh, yes, in Kim, we agree that single DQ terminal is, single DQ point is a first terminal. And, and I will jump there and explain to that issue as well, Your Honor, which is that if you go to, this is Kim. Kim talks about that single DQ. We don't dispute that that single DQ is a single shared terminal. What Kim talks about is it talks about the fact that you can add additional chips beyond those two. But Kim never says you should add them by combining them with one TSV. In fact, in the portion of Kim that Your Honor cited in the institution decision, which is at paragraph 50, Kim proposes adding additional ranks for each new chip. In the petition, what the petitioner did is they pointed to the green, this is on our slide 56, as the first die interconnect. And they pointed to the teal as the second die interconnect. And they proposed that you would put multiple dies connected to this first die interconnect. And that's how you would solve, that's how you would create the patent. The problem with that, and I can explain, the problem with that is that that would create an unavoidable collision. And the problem with that design is once they had put it in their petition, they then had to expose their expert to examination. And he made clear that if you ever added two chips to one rank, you would get an unavoidable collision. You would never.
I had some questions. This is Judge Callaghan. I had some questions that I wanted to ask you about the case in general, if it's okay. Because I don't know when we're going to get to the certain topics, but I want to talk a little bit about what an array die is. I question though, you mentioned that the JEDEC standard requires separate terminals for each output. So are the patents not cover JEDEC?
They're not. In fact, the HBM is the HBM to accommodate HBM about 4 years ago, JEDEC had to create an entirely new standard for interface.
Okay, thanks. Then I wanted to ask you if the term array dies is in the claims, obviously. Does that encompass non-DRAMs?
Yes, it does. And I will go there, Your Honor, because I've learned that answering questions of judges is more important than talking about what you want to talk about. Before we do, so I will answer that it does, and I will go to the DRAMs, but if you I'm just going to go there now. Why not? Okay. So the basic issue here is one of equity and due process, it seems to me. Array die is something that is different from a DRAM circuit. That's the construction.
This is Judge Callaghan. I wanted to clarify something there. I know the construction of the district court, and throughout your briefing, before institution and then after institution, you qualify that by saying things like Petitioner hasn't shown that these dies are different from Rajan's DRAM circuits. Is it your contention that the district court construed the term to mean anything different from Rajan's DRAM circuits or different from a DRAM circuit?
So the construction that was given by the district court was different from DRAM circuit. It was not different from Rajan's DRAM circuit. And we did not, the jury was not instructed that as long as it was different from, quote, Rajan's DRAM circuit, we were okay. We actually had to show that what was in the HBM products was not a DRAM circuit.
What is a DRAM circuit?
What is a DRAM circuit? In the DRAM circuit is a monolithic structure that includes transistors that hold state. And that when
so if you have a monolithic structure that with transistors that hold state, that cannot meet your claim?
If that's what you have, if that's what your chip is, that doesn't meet the claim.
Is that, I'm curious, maybe I'm missing something. Reho has chips that hold state. They have transistors on them, I'm guessing. So why, that's memory, right? Or am I missing something?
Well, Your Honor, I do think you're missing something in the following sense, which is that in Kim and you're not, which is that Reho and Kim designs would not meet the definition of DRAM of die array.
Why? What is a DRAM circuit then? Well, why do they not have a DRAM circuit if it says DRAM, for instance?
So the reason they don't have DRAM circuits is because they're monolithic, Your Honor. Or the reason they do have DRAM circuits is because they're monolithic.
Okay, we know they're monolithic?
Well, Your Honor.
Where is monolithic in the record? I didn't see that in the record anywhere.
Your Honor, may I respectfully push back on this, which is that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I didn't file this petition. They filed this petition, and in the petition, they pointed to DRAM for both Kim and Rajan, Kim and Reho as the basis for this petition. You can see it on slide 78, where they point to the JEDEC DDR SDRAM standard for their Kim combination. Slide 79, all of their combinations for Kim involve the JEDEC DRAM standard. For Reho, it's the same thing. Reho, they described it as an SDRAM chip. Reho, their motivation to combine was the SDRAM standard for combining with Reho. So the petition makes no discussion of NAND flash and no discussion of SRAM as being a basis for the combination. And so what they did in reply is they switched and said, oh, don't worry about this disclaimer, Your Honor, because it works the same with NAND and it works the same with SRAM. That is nowhere in the petition. That is nowhere in the declaration. That's a complete violation of due process. It's not proper. And to follow up on that, Dr. Wolf, in deposition, admitted that he's not aware of any NAND system that would integrate with Kim. He's not aware of any SRAM system that would integrate with Kim. And that best reference, as we talk about it, that best reference is a reference in which the NAND is just the backup. The interface is with the DRAM. And so you're asking me to prove a negative. I don't have to prove that Reho and Rajan are not DRAM circuits. Sorry, that Reho and Kim are not DRAM circuits. They have to prove, it's their burden of proof that they are. And they didn't want to do it because they wanted maximum flexibility to whipsaw us at the district court to go through extraordinary efforts to show how their HBM was different from what was in the prior art. Their HBM dyes were different in the prior art. It's their...
Counselor, this is Judge Goggin. I understand that, but what we have in front of us is a construction that the district court gave that we may or may not agree with, but the construction is that it's different from a DRAM circuit, and to gauge difference, we would have to know what a DRAM circuit is to then know if there's a difference. And Petitioner raised this in the SIR reply, saying that listed the work and showed how the accused products in litigation were different. And I read the testimony in Exhibit 2029, you were the examining attorney, and it asked various questions like, does this have a data port on it? And I think the guy said, yeah, our dies have a data port. So is it your contention that if there's a data port in addition to memory cells, then it's not a DRAM circuit because there's things in addition to the DRAM circuit?
So if we can go under seal, I can explain to you exactly how it's different.
This was testimony that was in the public. You asked several questions and you cited it, and it's in the record at Exhibit 2029-1077. And one of the things was you said it different. You asked the witness, I don't know who it was, maybe it was Mr. Wolf or Dr. Wolf. You asked him if there was a data port on their products, and he said yes, and implying that's a difference. And I'm wondering then, is the DRAM circuit the memory array, and then everything else? If you have everything else, it's an array die. Is that? I'm just trying to figure out what a DRAM circuit is. That's all.
So in our in our mind, a DRAM circuit is a monolithic die that holds state, and because it holds state, it can say one and zeros. It can say ones and zeros. Well powered.
And I guess okay, so all memories, I'm trying to figure out, I thought all memories do that, right? Do they not? They hold state, right? Ones and zeros, is that not right?
Well, DRAM holds states in ones and zeros while powered. Obviously, other types of memories don't hold state while powered. But other memories can hold state even if they're not powered.
Right, yeah, but they all hold state. So I'm just trying to figure out what a DRAM circuit is, so when we gauge it, what are we looking, what's the difference or not?
So
it sounds like a data port. It sounds like having a data port is a difference. Is that true?
So we pointed to the presence of data ports as well as non-monolithic logic and testing structure within the HBM die as the reason why we did not have DRAM circuits.
Okay, so a data port is a difference. Thank you.
Well, to be clear, and Judge Galligan, the data port on its own would not be a difference. Just having a data.
So what is the DRAM circuit of Rajan? What is that?
So the DRAM circuit of Rajan describes it as monolithic. And if you give me 1 second, I can pull up Rajan.
I see where Rajan mentions monolithic. It doesn't say it's limited to that. So you're saying that the district court construed a claim term to mean different from a DRAM circuit, and in that you then looked at that reference, which is not the asserted reference, by the way, it's a different reference, and you say that it's a monolithic DRAM circuit. That's what we're supposed to look at?
Well, to be clear, Your Honor, this is the reference that was the basis for the disclaimer. And so this is the reference you would need to look at to understand the scope of the disclaimer. But it says, it describes, for instance, monolithic memory circuits may take the form of, and then it lists an example, and it lists DRAM as an example of a monolithic memory circuit. So we take DRAM circuit to be a monolithic memory circuit with that holds state while powered.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Your Honor, it seems to me that this is something that the board is going to have to struggle with, which is that it's not our burden to show why Reho and Rajan are not a DRAM circuit. This was Petitioner's construction. This was Petitioner who advocated for this, and then Petitioner totally abdicated that responsibility at the time of trying to make out the case. So I'm going back now to connect two issues, which is why this idea of a separate chip select for each die, which was made up for the first time in reply and an oral argument, doesn't work for Reho plus Rajan. And the reason for that is quite simple. If you go to the Wolf deposition, which is exhibit 2025 at page 32, he admits that if you're going to split each of the dies into separate ranks, which is what they propose, that you would not start with Reho. And so the concept behind it of using the Reho plus Rajan combination, the nose of wax tactic that went from two CSs or two ranks with a CS to each rank, which was originally in Reho, coupled with the change in reply in which every chip becomes a CS. Every chip gets a CS. That doesn't work because it would destroy the entire purpose of Reho, which is to have parallel designs. Now turning to, and then I'm going to do it in parallel because they're linked. I did want to finish the defect in Kim as well, because Your Honor has taught them in the same breath, which is that this is Dr. Wolf admitting that his design from his petition of adding one additional chip to a rank would result in an unavoidable collision. In reply, they say that's not what the petition has proposed. Ask them to point out where in their declaration they identify in the specific claim elements something different, or the idea of using 4 ranks or 8 ranks or 16 ranks. It doesn't exist. The pointing to JEDEC doesn't work. And the reason why the pointing to JEDEC doesn't work is, let me give you an example. So in Kim, they say, oh, well, you just select out using chip select signals to avoid the collision. And this is one of their primary arguments. But if you look at Kim, and if you look at the Kim reference exhibit 114, and you go to paragraphs 42, and you go to paragraphs 31, you'll see that the way they've cleverly elided out the relevant portion of Kim, in which the timing that stops the collision in Kim is that unique structure that Kim creates, that block 1000. And it's that block 1000 right there, which we're showing on slide 59. That block 1000 is what means that the TSVs do not share an interconnect. They're not together. Those chips are on separate TSVs. Now, they also point to the idea of the document on the left as showing that chip selects solve all problems with collision. But there's 2 things to point about column on the left. First is that chip selects already existed in the Kim prior art. The chip selects were not sufficient to avoid the read after write collision in Kim. What was needed to add was the block 1000. The block 1000 is what means that the given dies do not share a single interconnect. And I want to expand on this. Any suggestion that JEDEC discloses a shared terminal for data lines is immediately disposed of, because the figure that they're showing you there is called a quad stacked SDRAM. And as Dr. Brogioli speaks about, and this is in our POR at paragraphs 39 through 40, and in paragraph 143 of Dr. Brogioli's report, the QD package is the package on the left. That's a QDP package, a quad design package. It is separate data wires going to every single one of the designs, every single one of the chips. So the analogy is, you can share a data terminal in the following sense. If you have separate stairwells going up to each of your dies, the individual bits can come up and down, and the buffer chip can deal with it. But what Kim has realized is that if you have one stairwell that's shared with both of the chips in Kim, you will have an ineluctable collision. And let me go and show this. This is what Kim uses, is this control circuit to solve that problem. Now if we're on slide, I did want to talk about one thing. One of the basic fundamental misconceptions of Rajan is that Rajan is about a TSV design. Rajan makes no reference to TSVs. Rajan never uses the term interconnect with reference to DRAM circuit connections, and Rajan provides no discussion of internal DRAM designs. And you don't have to take my word for it. This is Dr. Wolf, Exhibit 2024, at page 92, lines 15 through 23. He admits that there's no discussion of TSVs in Rajan. Rajan talks about timing techniques, and Rajan talks about using timing techniques. That's fine, because Rajan doesn't have one stairwell that all the data has to go up and down for each of the chip. Rajan talks about a shared data bus, but a shared data bus does not mean that the design has internal TSVs.
Counsel, this is Judge Galligan. I just want to clarify, most of the claims just require a die interconnect, right?
Oh, Your Honor, this is not about the claims. This is about the combination. So the combination that they use is a combination that describes internal TSVs in Kim and Reho, and then combining with Rajan.
So you're saying that Rajan couldn't be implemented? I mean, it shows that you share a data line between two dies, but you're saying that could not be a TSV?
It shows that you share a data bus. A data bus is not a data line. A data bus is where you connect to, where you end up with. And their own expert admits that Rajan discloses nothing about TSVs. And the QDP packages that were ultimately adopted based on Rajan, which is in here, that's ultimately the Rajan design. That was designed on left, which wire bonds. That's what was actually implemented. So I did want to talk.
This is Judge Galligan, but I just want to clarify something. So, you know, a TSV is a way to get data between a wire bond. I mean, your patent says something like die interconnects example, TSV, wire bonds, and something else, I forget. But so it's a data channel is this thing in Rajan. So you have two chips share a data channel. Oh, I mean, I'm not trying to figure out what the difference between that and they're interconnecting two dies. So why isn't that a die interconnect?
So this is the shared data bus on the left. I'm on slide 24, which is at POR 78 through 79. This is the shared data bus that Rajan speaks about. And if you read Rajan's language, those figures he is drawing at the right are figures that he's using to depict a shared data bus. A shared data bus doesn't mean you have shared data wires or interconnects that are shared between two chips. Those are two different things. There's nothing.
And this is Judge Galligan, and Dr. Bergioli's declaration, let me just back up because in the patent, and I'm going to look at, it's, I think it's column 5, but yeah, it's column 5 of 160. It says example in column 5, lines 54 to 56, examples of die interconnects include, but are not limited to, through silicon vias TSV, conducting rods, wire bonds, and pins. So the wire bonds can be die interconnects. And by die interconnects, it means you connect die, right? Dies.
Well, so I think there's two observations. One is that there are internal wire bonds that exist in packages. And if you look at the structure of the claims talk about the wire bonds connecting to a data port within the chip. But more to the point, I think what Your Honor is getting to is why do I care that Rajan is outside if the claim allows for outside? And that's a reasonable question. I don't think, regardless of whether you construe the claim as allowing for outside, the combination that they disclose is a combination between a TSV structure in Reho and Kim and Rajan, and Rajan is not a TSV disclosure reference. Their own expert admitted that.
Right, I guess I'm just wondering, this is Judge Galligan, I'm just wondering if the patent is concerned with die interconnects and says you can use any one of these. Was there, I mean, why then, if you introduce a TSV, is the patent completely different, is what I'm saying? I mean, the claim covers wire bonds, claim 1 at least.
Yeah, so I think you're mixing up two things, Your Honor, which is that their combination is Reho plus Rajan and Kim plus Rajan. So their proposals are two TSV designs coupled with a design that is not a TSV design. So what I'm going at is the basis for that combination. If you're asking me, would this be obvious if you did a combination with external wire bond as your primary and secondary references to get both of those designs, or maybe you just use Rajan on your own? The answer is no, because Rajan doesn't show a shared data terminal. It's nowhere disclosed.
Okay,
Your
thank you.
Honor, this is Anita here. Maybe it's a little bit easier. The wire bonds referenced in the patent, as explained by Dr. Bergioli, is not the same wire bond as used in Rajan. Rajan's wire bond is external. It's not internal. So on the slide that Ms. Shakespeare showed earlier, you will see that each die actually has its own wire bond. The wire bonds are never shared between the dies. That's why they're not die interconnects, and they are not shared among the dies. I hope that clarifies some of the questions you may have.
This is Judge Galligan. Yeah, this is Judge Galligan. By the way, I meant to tell you you're 1 hour and 5 minutes. But on that, Dr. Bergioli has this testimony at page 21 of his deck. It's a footnote to paragraph 39, and he just says, the 060 patent discloses that an example of a die interconnect is a wire bond, but that one is different from a wire bond dangling from the side of a DRAM circuit such as those in Rajan. He doesn't really explain why. I don't, and is a wire bond, I mean, if a wire bond connects two chips externally, that's not a die interconnect?
Well, I think,
Sorry.
no, I think the answer is that if you look at Rajan never describes, nor do I think it's theoretically possible in the Rajan design, two wire bonds connecting two packages together. It should, what you describe as let me see if I can get there.
So your honors, page 21 of Dr. Brogioli's declaration, he says the type of wire bonds referenced by the 060 pattern are wires internal to a die acting, for example, like a redistribution line. And he gave an example of the red and blue wires in DDX 448, which is exhibit 2030. Which is Samsung's experts.
Which is to say that there's nothing in Rajan. Let me say it this way. One, their expert admits that Rajan doesn't disclose TSVs. Two, it doesn't talk about them sharing a data wire. Rajan talks about them sharing a data bus. So I don't see how from Rajan you would get the idea of a shared TSV when Rajan speaks solely about sharing data buses, and a data bus under JEDEC standard involves individual data wires coming from each of the chips.
Okay.
I want to briefly discuss two issues. One is the electrical communication issue, and the other is the idea of having dies arrays of different sizes. And I'll start with the die array of different sizes. In Reho, the idea is that the first and second, in the patent, the requirements, the first and second dies have, the drivers are of different structural size. That is, there's no basis on which that would ever be used in Reho. Reho has manufacturing variants that's solved through resistors. It has nothing to do with parasitic capacitance, which is why you use different driver sizes. The petition points solely to manufacturing variants as the motivation. And the reality is that Reho 2 came before Reho 1, and Reho 1 does not propose anything other than a single driver size. This idea of Ellsbury as showing multiple drivers, Ellsbury is not one of the combinations. That's just a cover for a deficient petition. The first and second drivers must be different structures under Federal Circuit precedent. We talk about this on slide 30 in our briefing. This is the basis for the combination of Reho plus Reho 2, which is that manufacturing variances need to be accounted for in designing. This is from slide 31. On slide 32, each of those manufacturing variances are impedance variation or penetrating resistance variation. And their expert, this is on slide 118, discussing his testimony at 197.21 through 199.2. He discusses the fact that in Reho, the difference in that resistors are added to compensate for any difference. And so there is a complete and utter balance of any sort of difference or variance in Reho, which would make which sort of, it's basic failure of their motivation to combine. On slide 33, we discussed the fact that Reho 1, which is their primary reference, solves the problems of the differing resistance without any different needs for drivers of different size. And the Ellsbury, which they describe as showing 2 drivers, that's not part of their petition. It's not part of their proposed combination. It's completely new. And I should note that Ellsbury doesn't show 2 drivers of different sizes. Going to slides, going to the Kim argument, which is that that Kim plus Wyman would propose drivers of different sizes. Oh, you know, before I do that, Your Honor, I realize that I should talk about their 4th combination, which is what they ignored talking about. And I will do that before I go to Kim, and I apologize for jumping around. Okay, so they've now told us that's the 4th possibility of 4 ranks, 2 ranks sharing a data interconnect. 4th possibility is the one they're going with, which is nice to know about. It's 4 ranks, 2 ranks sharing a die interconnect. And what Dr. Wolf theorized in his declaration is something in his deposition, not in his declaration, is something very similar to the following. Of course, when he asked them to explain it, this is on slide 184 and 185, he couldn't explain it at all. He said, I'm not going to design a memory system sitting here. He didn't need to design a complete memory system sitting in his deposition. He needed to disclose how this design would work in the combination. And it doesn't work. And the reason being is because there is still, whether you have 2 ranks or 4 ranks, there is still going to be a cross-rank read after write collision unless you put in the block 1000 into, keep the block 1000 into Kim, and they don't have that block 1000. And so what you see—
This is Judge Gallagher. I just want to give you a heads up. You're 1:15 and a half. I forgot to tell you.
No, I appreciate that, Your Honor, but I do think this is important, so I do want to get into it, which is that even if you use chip select signals on all 4 ranks, you're still going to have the same problem in that the write takes longer, the write takes longer than the read, and a read after write collision will be caused. And this is discussed at slide 189, and it's discussed at Brogioli, paragraph 129. It doesn't matter how many CSs you have, you're still going to have the problem. And the reason why I say it doesn't matter how many chip select signals you have, you're still going to have that problem, is because in Kim has chip select signals. I'm on slide 62. They talk about the fact that there's an unavoidable collision between, the unavoidable collision in Kim is a hypothetical case that applies to the prior art. That is not what Kim says. Kim says a data collision is unavoidable when rank 0 and rank 1 share a TSV. That's what Kim says. This is on slide 62. And in Kim's actual design, rank 1 and rank 2 share a TSV. This is on slide 63, which makes the collision unavoidable. And the idea that Kim can solve it by chip select signals is nonsensical. Kim has chip select signals. CS0 and CS1 are the chip select signals. The chip select signals don't stop the collision. The chip select signals make the collision occur more often. The chip select signals cannot solve for read after write collision. I do need to discuss 2 other issues. I've just realized, given my limited amount of time, I need to do them quickly. The first is on Reho 3. On Reho, we have this idea of what electrical communication means. And in my mind, this is just another issue of due process, Your Honor. And in other words, Judge Galligan, you're making arguments that Petitioner has never made. You're hypothesizing combinations that petitioner has not proposed in their petition. And this electrical communication of Reho is another example of that, which is Reho distinguishes between an on state when the switch is turned on and an off state, which he calls non-electrical connection. I agree with you that that sounds a lot like non-electrical communication. It just happens not to be. If you go to slide 41, Samsung expert in the district court made clear that if there is any physical connection between the die and the TSV, regardless of whether the data port is turned on or off, there is still electrical communication. Dr. Stone, Micron's expert, made the same point in the his testimony, which is that if there is a physical connection, even to a disabled data port, which is what Reho is, a disabled data port, there is still electrical communication. And he goes into it in detail on slide 43 about how a stub between a TSV, a stub, by the way, is the same as an open switch. Would still be in electrical communication. And what petitioners keep saying in their petition is that under our interpretation of electrical communication, we lose. They don't say under their interpretation of electrical communication. They say under ours. But Dr. Brogioli at trial and in this proceeding has made clear that that structure in Reho is not electrical communication. So on die array, on electrical communication, on Reho plus Park, on Reho plus Rajan, on Kim plus Rajan, there's this fundamental due process in which the arguments that they're running are not arguments that were anywhere in their petition. This is a nose of wax where we just keep after running and play whack-a-mole. And particularly, which is dispiriting to me, Your Honor, is this argument that we had to prove that Rajan, that Reho and Park are DRAM circuits. And we had this whole colloquy, and you asked me why they're not DRAM circuits. It's not my burden. And because they didn't give a proposal for what DRAM circuit is, and they didn't give a construction of it, Your Honor, I have nothing to shoot against. And that was intentional. It was intentional to make it impossible for me to shoot down their arguments. Your Honor, I do need to save a certain amount of time for rebuttal, but I would beg you with every fiber of my being to ask them these questions. Where does 4 chip selects solving for collision appear in their petition and declaration? It does not. Where does the analysis of why die arrays are not DRAM circuits appear in their petition? It does not. Where does the fork in the road, which is the shared data terminal, appear in their petition? It does not. It appears nowhere. And that is, on its own, a basis why this petition should be denied. This is an incredibly important patent to NETLIST. And I can engage with arguments that are in the papers where my expert has a chance to respond to them. It is unfair and improper for me to have to engage with made-up arguments and reply and in papers that have not been fully vetted. Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you, counsel. This is Judge Galligan. You used 1 hour and 22 minutes. Let me make a note of that. And Petitioner, you have 24 minutes. You may begin.
Thank you, Your Honor. So I received quite a challenge there. The allegation that fork in the road was not in the petition. Obviously, that's incorrect. You can certainly search for it. I will show it to you. So if you look, for example, this is the 060 petition, page 29 in the motivation to combine Kim and Rajan. We talk about fork in the road being common when implementing rank multiplication. It's right there on page 29, and we show Ellsbury as an example of a common implementation of fork in the road for rank multiplication. And to give a little more background, the very first thing we talk about in the petition is rank multiplication. And as we explained in the petition, the 060 and 160 patents incorporate by reference several patents, including the 386 patent. There's also some other patents, the 912 patent, which are all rank multiplication patents in the prior art from many, many, many years earlier. And as we explain, with rank multiplication, you have chip select signals that are used to create more chip select signals in combination with an address signal. So you can have the host thinking that there's 2 ranks and the host only knows about 2 chip select signals, when in reality, there are 4 ranks and 4 chip select signals. This is explained on pages 8 through 10 of our petition. And we go on to explain that you use a fork in the road to avoid data collisions. So the chip select, you got 4 chip select signals and you have a fork in the road, and that's what avoids the data collision as discussed on page 9 and then is shown on page 10. So in the top of page 10 is figure 6D from the prior art 386 patent, which is an example of the well-known rank multiplication, where you can see DQA and DQB come together and there's a fork in the road, and you have 150 is a switch that can switch between the upper fork and the lower fork. This is admitted prior art. And so to your question about Judge Galligan, like, where does the 060 and 160 patents show the die interconnects sharing a data terminal? The patent itself doesn't. All the patent does is incorporate all of this old admitted prior art about rank multiplication and fork in the road. This is admitted prior art. There's nothing novel or non-obvious about the fork in the road or rank multiplication. Rajan is another example, as is Ellsbury, of rank multiplication with a fork in the road, and that's what we use for our motivation to combine Kim and Rajan. So if you go to pages 21 through 30, where we talk about the combination of Kim and Rajan, and there's a similar discussion in the other IPR. The page numbers may be off by a few pages, but it's the same discussion. We talk all about rank multiplication and specifically the fork in the road on pages 29 to 30. So to this argument from the other side about due process and this is all new, it's not true. It's right there in the petition as part of the combination as well as the motivation to combine. With respect to array dies and that whole argument, the petition pointed out, again in this same discussion, that Rajan emulates the JEDEC interface with his buffer chip. So it doesn't matter what type of memory is actually used, whether it's DRAM or not DRAM. Rajan has the interface that complies with JEDEC. So the petition never relies on DRAM memory. What the petition relies on is Rajan has this buffer chip that emulates the JEDEC standard. And the institution decision correctly recognized that, as shown on page 67. I talked about this in my opening slides as well, which is that, for example, on 72, Rajan is not limited to DRAM. And the reason is because it has this interface that can work with anything. There were a lot of different points that were covered, and I can respond to some of those. But before I do, is there any questions in particular the board would like me to focus on first?
Counsel, this is Judge Galligan. What about patent owner's contention that there may be a sharing of a data bus, or I guess Rajan calls it a data channel at some point too, but that wouldn't involve, you couldn't use a TSV, or I'm paraphrasing, but it wouldn't be applicable to a TSV.
That's incorrect. So Rajan, as we can see here on slide 72 and also many other slides, has a data bus. Rajan's not limited to any particular data bus. A TSV is a data bus. I heard counsel for the other side say that somehow a data bus is different from a TSV. That's not true. All a TSV is a data bus that goes vertically through the die, but it still is carrying data lines. And when you have multiple data lines, that creates the data bus. There was a related argument by counsel about the JEDEC standard not applying to TSVs, and that is not correct. Let me get up an example here. For example, slide 37. So what counsel was saying is that suggesting that somehow Rajan and the JEDEC standard could have separate wire bonds. And what counsel was pointing to, I'm highlighting here with the green rectangles, which I think are referred to as the data pads. So counsel was saying, well, maybe you could have a wire bond from that green rectangle. But what he's ignoring is what we're pointing to, which is the solid green line, which is the shared data bus, DQ0 through 7. That is a shared data bus in the JEDEC standard, and it could be a TSV. There's nothing that prevents you from using a TSV for a shared data bus. Are there more questions along those lines? Okay. Council was jumping around a lot, so I may not have all the slide numbers correct, but there was an argument about Reho not sharing data terminals. And their slide 92 is an example of this argument. They may have been pointing to a different slide number. They were jumping around a lot, so I couldn't keep track of all of them. The problem with their argument about Reho not sharing a data terminal or not having what we sometimes refer to as a fork in the road is that it ignores the teachings of Rajan. So if we look, for example, at our slide 136, in the combination between Reho and Rajan, there would be multiple chip selects going to the different die, but you would still have the fork in the road, which actually I think is better shown on slide 123, which we talked about earlier. So on the bottom right, in the combination with Rajan, you still have the fork in the road where the two different die interconnects do still connect to the same data terminal, resulting in the fork in the road. And you have a switch in the buffer chip that can route the data either through one data conduit of one die interconnect or through the other data conduit up the other die interconnect. And again, this is all admitted prior art. Rank multiplication and the fork in the road is all admitted prior art. The 060 and 160 patent does not itself contribute anything to this area of technology. All it does is it incorporates by reference lots and lots of prior art references that talk about this. And this is the same issue with respect to data collisions. Again, the 060 and 160 patents don't say anything about data collisions. All they do is point to the admitted prior art. So for example, on slide 45, this is the point we were making, is the 060 and 160 patents doesn't teach any solution of data collisions. All it does is refer to the admitted prior art. And some of that admitted prior art is shown, for example, on slide 43. It includes a 386 patent that we discussed in the petition for rank multiplication and fork in the road, the 436 patent, which is related to the 386 patent, the 537 patent, which is also related to the 386 patent, and the 912 patent, which I think is identical to the specification of the 386 patent. So there's nothing new in the patent with respect to sharing the data terminal or avoiding data collisions. I'll talk briefly about chip select signals in Reho again. There was an argument that Reho doesn't need chip select signals or doesn't use chip select signals in the same way. And this is our slide 136. That whole argument, again, is ignoring the teaching of Rajan, which is part of the combination. So in the combination with Rajan and rank multiplication, you would have chip select signals for each of the 4 stacked dies, and those chip select signals would select one of those dies, and that's how you can avoid the data collision. Let me see what else I saw questions about. I want to get back to this notion of due process and so forth. For array die, again, we pointed to Rajan's buffer chip as complying with the JEDEC standard, and that is the buffer chip that is why JEDEC is relevant, not the DRAM chip, because again, the type of memory doesn't matter. It's the interface that matters. And the trial practice guide, page 73, makes clear that a petitioner may file a reply that responds to the patent owner's arguments. And that's all that our reply did. We responded to the arguments that they raised. Furthermore, the trial practice guide goes on to say on page 73 that the board will permit the petitioner in its reply brief to address any issue discussed in the institution decision. The institution decision discussed array dies, discussed this claim construction issue, discussed this issue of non-DRAM array dies. There was plenty of notice, an opportunity to be heard by NETLIST on this issue. And they were heard. I mean, they've got tons and tons of pages on this. Their expert goes on and on about this. So that this idea of due process, I don't think is accurate. They had a lot of opportunity to respond to these issues, and they did. And there was also a recent case after our reply brief came out by the Federal Circuit that's on point. This is the Parker Vision case versus Vidal, December 15th, 2023. Precedential decision talks about this issue about the scope of reply and was permissible on pages 15 through 18. And on page 18, the board was affirmed. Federal Circuit said, we do not believe the board, in considering Intel's reply arguments, failed to comply with its regulations, specifying that reply may only respond to arguments raised in the patent owner response. Intel's reply arguments, as discussed above, responded to a proposed construction that originated in Parker Vision's patent owner response. So it's a very similar situation to what we have here, where NETLIST latched on to a particular claim construction for array die, and we responded to that. On the question of array die, Judge Galligan had a question about, what does it actually mean? Or what was NETLIST's theory? And our interpretation is actually the same as what you were suggesting, Judge Galligan, is that NETLIST was suggesting that if there's a data port, in addition to a DRAM circuit, that satisfies the district court's claim construction. I mean, that's literally all that they pointed to in Exhibit 2029, was that there was something other than a DRAM circuit on the die, and that was sufficient to satisfy the claim construction. I don't know what the district court's going to do with that, whether the district court will agree or disagree with that.
Counsel, this is Judge Galligan. So in that testimony, and don't get anything confidential, but just in the 5 pages that were cited, what was the DRAM circuit, if you can say? I mean, what was that? And then there was a data port in addition, if you can answer.
The short answer is I don't know. I'm not counsel in the district court. I haven't seen anything under seal. But no, I don't think there's any sort of special meaning to DRAM circuit. So in other words, I don't think that the accused products have some super secret DRAM circuit that's different from a DRAM circuit. I think it's exactly what you said, as shown on their slide, page 243. They're just arguing that if there's anything other than a DRAM circuit on the die, that satisfies the district court's claim construction. Now, it's an open question whether that's correct. There's still post-trial motions pending, which is why our petition has always taken the position that there's no need to resolve this claim construction issue because the claims are clearly invalid, whether you construe them to cover DRAM or whether you construe them to exclude DRAM, in which case they would cover non-DRAM. As the institution decision correctly found, either way, the claims are obvious, and therefore the board doesn't need to resolve this claim construction issue. The district court probably needs to resolve it to resolve the issues in that court, but in this proceeding, the prior art is very clear that both Kim and Rajan and Reho work the same, whether it's DRAM or not DRAM. Any follow-up on that? Just some other points that we could talk about. On this electrical communication with Reho, there was the argument that Reho just shuts off the data port. That's what opposing counsel said, that Reho just shuts off the data port. That is not correct. Reho has a transmission gate that sits between the TSV on the left, as shown on our slide 112, and everything else to the right, which would include the data port. And the purpose of the transmission gate is it creates a break in the wire. So it physically disconnects, or as well as, one can do with electrical circuitry, it disconnects everything to the right, including any data port. So Reho does not simply turn off the data port, which would include the L1, C2, R2 circuit shown on slide 112. Reho does something different, which is it completely disconnects the data port. And therefore, it's clear under any claim construction that Reho does not have electrical communication, because you don't have any electrical connection, you don't have any electrical load, and there's no way to communicate with the data port. Any questions on electrical communication and data ports? There were a lot of arguments about, I'll use Reho and Rajan again as an example. A lot of arguments about how NETLIST was saying that Reho wouldn't work. Those were bodily incorporation arguments, which we responded to on slide 30. So I just want to remind the board of that case law, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but a lot of the arguments that NETLIST was making are essentially bodily incorporation arguments, where they ignore the combination and they just focus on Reho, for example, without taking into consideration the rest of the teachings of the combination. We can talk a little bit more about the collisions in Kim. And again, Kim's collision, is discussed on our slide 29, is limited to a specific situation. So it talks about a data collision as unavoidable, but it explains that that is assuming the first and second data output lines operate in the same manner, and it's referring to the same manner as the prior art. So it's not that there's always going to be a data collision in every situation. It's only in this limited situation. And Kim, as the other side admitted, does have chip select signals. And Kim admits that as our slide 32 shows, that if you use a predetermined time interval set there between, that you will avoid the collision. So the chip select signal has to be timed properly to avoid the collision. If you send two chip select signals at the same time, obviously there'll be a collision. So you have to have a time interval between the chip select signals. And that's what Rajan talks about. Slides 33 through 34 is having enough time between the commands, and the command always includes the chip select signal. And that's how you avoid the collision. And it's also what the JEDEC standard talks about, slide 37. So if you look in the bottom left, every command, whether it's a write command or a read command, includes a chip select signal. So whenever you send a read or write command, you are asserting the chip select signal. And so by timing, when you send the commands, that will time when the chip select signals are transmitted, and that'll time when each data array die is selected. And that's how you can avoid the collisions. And that's the whole point of the timing diagrams in JEDEC on slides 38 and 39. And these timing diagrams will work with Kim as well. And if you need more time in Kim, it's no problem, as shown in slide 39. You can increase the read latency so that so that the data for the read command will arrive at a later point in time, so it won't collide with any data that's still lingering from the write command. Any questions on that issue?
Counsel, this is Judge Galligan. You have 2 minutes left.
All right. I think I'm pretty much done. Let me just look through my notes to see if there's anything important to raise. There was a discussion early on about whether column 8, lines 1 through 21 of the 160 patent solves the data collision issue, and the answer is no. Again, there's no disclosure in the 060, 160 patent itself about data collisions or how to solve data collisions. The only disclosure is the incorporation by reference of admitted prior art dealing with rank multiplication and the fork in the road, which is very similar to the Rajan reference that we use in our combinations. There was one question about, or comment about di-interconnects.
For like 10 seconds, Counsel.
Good. All right. Just on this point about di-interconnects, Judge Galligan, you're correct. The patent treats di-interconnects broadly, and Rajan, the data bus in Rajan, certainly is a di-interconnect, and it would be obvious in combination with Kim or with Reho to make that data bus a TSV. Both Kim and Reho have TSVs, and so it'll be obvious to use a TSV. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard, Your Honors.
Okay, thank you, Counsel. Let me stop there. And patent owner, he went about 45 seconds over, so I'll give you a little extra time. You got 9 minutes. You may begin. May begin. Thanks. Oh, I think you're muted, Counsel.
At the beginning of my argument, I laid down a number of challenges for the petitioner. The first challenge is to describe where in their identification of a shared data terminal in Reho, they point to this quote, fork in the road, imaginary design, that exists in Rajan. So if you look at their petition, paragraphs 104 to 105, and you can look as much as you want, this idea that fork in the road means a shared data terminal, and therefore Reho plus Rajan equals a shared data terminal is utterly absent from the petition. The fact that they point to some random references to fork in the road at the beginning of their petition does not relieve them of their obligation. This was made up after the fact, after the damaging admissions of their expert. Petitioner also ignored the fact that the entire design of Reho is to have 256 parallel pipes going down at the same time to get as wide of a bandwidth as possible. The second challenge I laid down is find for me where in the prior art, where in the petition declaration, it says 4 chip select signals solve for data collision. Where in the petition, where in the declaration, except it says that our combination is chip select signals for each individual die. That is utterly absent from my brother's argument. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is it doesn't exist in the petition and it doesn't exist in the prior art. The idea that a shared data bus means that you have a shared interconnect is an exercise in total fiction. IPR at 78 through 89. This is a JEDEC style design. Shared data bus, individual data wires. Their own expert admitting that Rajan doesn't disclose doesn't disclose a TSV. Dr. Brogioli speaking at length in unrebutted testimony in paragraph 143 why Rajan does not disclose sharing a data bus. Kim 2. The creative quoting of Kim 2 that says chip select solves Kim 2. If you look at paragraphs 42 through 45 of Kim 2, if you look at paragraphs 26, 29, and 31 of Kim 2, the way the collision is solved is by using the block 1000 structure. The block 1000 structure is what keeps them separate. There's a fundamental miscarriage of due process if this board allows them to make up their CS solves collision argument in reply and in their papers without any evidentiary declaration in the petition, and allows them to change their combinations from what they were in the original petition to this separate CS to each design. Take them at their word, Your Honor. Their combinations is separate CSs. You will find nowhere in the petition or declaration that separate CSs solve the collision problem. And in fact, to the contrary, you will find the use of chip select in Kim requires something additional to solve collision. And on to the last point. If in reply we get an argument, a Lockwood argument, we have no ability to respond to that with the declaration. Collisions was a major point of what they discussed in their original petition. It's referenced 8 times, and they have no explanation for why CS solves it or fork in the road solves it. The design that we have, which increases speed and latency, is what allows for HBMs today to work without unacceptable collisions. There's nothing in the record. The design of Reho plus Rajan or Kim plus Rajan was able to increase the speed to obviate the risk of those collisions. And I will say, the design that Dr. Lee created, in which you are calculating precisely the load threshold with lengths of TSVs, plus the physical separation of the die array, that combination of quantitative analysis and load targeting appears nowhere in the prior art. Your Honors, Ultimately, at the end of the day, you have the power to destroy this patent, and I recognize that. But there is an obligation to not treat this process as a nose of wax, which I respectfully submitted to you, petitioner has done because of the fundamental defects in the original papers. Thank you, Your Honors.
Okay, thank you, Counselor. The cases, so the oral argument for these cases is over. We will now, and we appreciate the parties' arguments and very well prepared counsel, so thank you very much for that. Now we want to turn briefly to while we're on the record, turn briefly to the request for lead to file supplemental information. As I mentioned earlier, we received an email from patent owner, and I'd like to do this fairly briefly, not take more than 10 minutes, but I just want to hear from patent owner. It looks like, you put some reasons in the email here. It sounds like you just took a deposition of Micron's declarant, Dr. Gary Woods. The deposition occurred on January 3rd, I think. I saw that somewhere. Oh yeah, January 3rd, and you now want to introduce testimony that you allege is inconsistent with some positions taken by the petitioner in this case. My question is, one of the questions I had is, you were apparently served a report with this person's opinions some time ago, of course, and then you deposed him on that report. So why is this a surprise that you got these opinions at this point, at January 3rd, as opposed to when you got the report?
Your Honor, two issues. One, report's not testimony, so report would be hearsay. It's the testimony under oath that binds the party. And second, that the testimony that he gave at deposition went significantly beyond and was much more aggressive than his report.
Well, putting aside whether the testimony itself is hearsay, because this is another proceeding and all that, but you were aware of positions, and now you're saying you were sort of caught off guard, I guess. Did you make an effort? I mean, we're at, you took the deposition right before the oral argument. It's not like this was a surprise that he has these positions, right?
Your Honor, they were more aggressive and in a much crisper form than in the original report. The report is not something we can submit to you because the report is sealed, confidential information that Micron has refused to unseal. What we can do is flag for you what he said under oath and testimony. I think this is a more global issue, though, Your Honor, which is that, if I may, this in particular, HBM, what Mr. Chandler is saying about the meaning of die-array and electrical communication is completely opposite from what they said in the district court. And if Your Honors think that that's appropriate, then I guess the testimony from their experts is moot. But if you think that there's only one set of facts between a district court and the PTAB, and there are only one set of facts, and you're bound by those facts, then I think these dramatically inconsistent statements become relevant. That's what I come down to.
Okay, Mr. Chandler, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, just to be clear, Dr. Woods is not our expert, and we're not in that case. So I've never seen his testimony. It's under seal. I never saw the report. This is all new to me. If NETLIST wanted discovery in these IPRs, they should have, tried to seek discovery in these IPRs, whether from Dr. Wood. The other expert they keep pointing to is Dr. Stone. Again, Dr. Stone is not a Samsung expert. The testimony they're pointing to from Dr. Stone is not a case that Samsung's involved in. And we think it's inappropriate and untimely for NETLIST to be constantly bombarding the board every time some random witness in some random case says something. NETLIST is emailing the board saying, we want to submit this testimony. The board has procedures for discovery. The board has deadlines for the proceedings, and NETLIST hasn't complied with either of those. So we think it's It's inappropriate. It's not in the interest of justice. This is a similar issue that came up in IPR 2022-996, paper 48 at page 4. Similar situation, the board denied NETLIST request to try to introduce testimony from another Micron witness, and the board, in our view, properly denied the request both under 403 as having minimal probative value, but also for being untimely because NETLIST didn't satisfactorily explain why it hadn't sought the deposition in this proceeding and why the deposition hadn't been taken earlier. So unless there are any questions from the board, I think that's sufficient from our standpoint to deny the request by NETLIST.
And Your Honor, if I can just say one more thing, which is that everything I said to you today about the meaning of DRAM array, about electrical communication, I am bound by, and they will hoist me on my own petard in district court based on those statements. And Samsung and Micron have made an art of taking entirely inconsistent positions in the district court and in this case, and they believe they can get away with it as long as the board doesn't see or turns a blind eye to that inconsistency. And that's what I'm trying to address. And petard is spelled P-I-T-A-R-D, Madam Court Reporter.
If you'd like me to respond,
Thank you.
I can, but if not,
No, that's all right. Let me just see if there's anything else I wanted to mention. Yeah, and one other thing is, I just was wondering, there's a protective order in that case, right? That prohibits disclosure of that or use of it in this case, right?
That's absolutely right. Unless you order it, we cannot show it to you.
and this is a point I think counsel for Micron is in a better position to discuss because it's again not the case that Samsung's in. My understanding is that there may be motion practice in district court on this issue. I don't believe the board can order the district court to do something. I think this is an issue in NETLIST. There may be a dispute in the district court about whether it's appropriate to take the district court testimony outside of the district court, and counsel for Micron may be able to comment on where that stands, but I think that may be a live dispute in district court.
It's not a live dispute. In other words, based on the CFRs, it's our position that they have an obligation to provide inconsistent testimony to us so we can present it to the board. And it's this board which has the ability to enforce the CFRs, not a district court.
Okay. I think we've heard the parties' positions. Of course, we have the positions in an email. Unless
Your Honor, may it please the board, this is Matt Hopkins for Petitioner Micron. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Okay. I don't think we have any questions right now, but we can always organize another call if we need to on this. But unless Judges Jurgen and McShane have anything further on this, feel free to speak.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Nothing from me. Appreciate
We'll
the
take this
counsel's arguments.
Your Honors, thank you very much.
Well,
Thank you very much for your time and patience. This was a hard-fought argument, and I appreciate your patience.
thank you very much to you both. And we'll take the matter of the supplemental information under advisement. And just one other thing, this is under, you want to submit it under 42123B, right? The late submission of supplemental information.
Yes, Your Honor, based on, and then
Right.
the predicate of that is the failure to disclose, which
Okay.
is the remedy for it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your
With
Honor.
that, hearing nothing else, we are adjourned. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Does the court reporter have anything for us? Questions?
Yes, thank you. Just one moment. I was able to get most of them from the documents, but this was towards the beginning. It sounded like an in-rate mute set or something.
Mute, I think. M-O-U-T-T-E.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
TTET. It's on slide 30 of our slides. It's at 1067. So INRAE, MOUTTET.
Got it, thank you. Dr. Lee, is that Lee?
Yes.
And then is it Parker? Is that conventional spelling?
So, Mr. Shakespeare, you misspoke a few times. You said Parker, I think perhaps instead of Kim or Rajan. So I think you just misspoke. So
Yeah, I said Park, I meant Kim, but Park is normal spelling, P-A-R-K.
Park, okay. And is it the acronym HBM?
Yes, H is in Henry, B is in boy, M is in MAGA, or Magna.
Yes, and Dr. Stone, is that conventional spelling?
It is, S-T-O-N-E.
And then is it TSB?
T as in Tom, S as in Sam, V as in Very.
Thank you. Dr. Gary Woods, is that conventional spelling?
It is, yes.
Those are all the questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Court Reporter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Bye.